Okay, welcome back. I call the meeting back to order. We'll continue on with our next presentation. It's 4.4, Community Services 2022 Budget Overview. Craig Shanks, Director of Community Services. I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good afternoon to Council. You've already heard from some other departments, so I'll be relatively brief just on the initial introduction here. So, as you said, I'm Craig Shanks. Most of you know me, Director of Community Services, and today I'm providing a very brief overview of the Community Services 2022 budget. So within our org chart, there is three divisions specifically within Community Services, and I do have the managers on the Zoom call with us. You can probably see them on your screen. So first in the administration area, the executive assistant for the department is Leanne Donnelly. And I'm going to skip over to the customer services box here because Leanne is currently and has been for a little bit performing double duty, and she's also the acting manager of customer services for us. Also online is Manager Jorg Peterson, and Jorg is the manager of building and property. And then finally also on the Zoom call is Jen Johnson, who's the manager of our Parks and Recreation division. A few brief things on this. So Parks and Recreation, you may have noticed, if you're picking up on it, that in the past it's been Parks, Recreation, and Culture. We are making a shift next year to Parks and Recreation, specifically regarding culture from a standpoint of what economic development is currently doing from a culture perspective within the city of Kawartha Lakes. They have a culture officer, so we will still provide some assistance in the cultural form. Certainly the grants currently still reside within community services, but from a general standpoint of services provided, we truly are Parks and Recreation, and to try to limit some confusion with some of the general public, the culture aspect will be residing solely in the economic development area. I think you all probably know each of the different areas. So from an administrative standpoint, we do all of the administration, Leanne and I, from a community service perspective. It's also, though, dealing with some high-level boards or agencies within the city of Kawartha Lakes. Some of them are external and some of them are internal. So whether it be the Fenland Falls Power Links Group, the various chest fund organizations that are in the city of Kawartha Lakes, they all flow through the administrative area within community services. Within building and property in Jorg's area. So he looks after basically all the non-recreational facilities for the most part within the city of Kawartha Lakes. So any of the administrative buildings, whether it be City Hall and the service centers, the home location of community services down at 50 Wolf Street, 31 Mary Street, the HR building directly next door to us, the various library facilities across the city of Kawartha Lakes as well, the police services station, so I've probably missed a few, but predominantly building and property looks after those facilities that are non-parks and recreation across the city. Customer service, so again we're back to Leanne there, and as you know that's the four service center facilities within the city of Kawartha Lakes and the staff and the services that are provided out of them, as well as the city's call center line, which the staff in each of the service centers log on to, and we manage the calls from across the city at a number of different service centers. They're not all located at one area, and I'll probably speak a little bit more to that further on in the presentation. And then Parks and Recreation, which is the largest of the divisions within community services. So obviously there's all of the parks, as is mentioned in the title, and there's roughly 150 parks across the city of Kawartha Lakes, ranging in size and ranging in use, from passive parks to highly used recreational parks and leisure parks. There is obviously all of our recreation facilities, which includes our arenas and pools, as well as our community halls, some of them which are attached to arena facilities, and some of which are standalone facilities. There's the various programming that takes place in all those facilities, so specifically fitness and aquatics programs. There are some beaches, there's Centennial Park Trailer Park, there is over 200 kilometers of trails, so it's a pretty significant portfolio within Parks and Recreation, and then on top of that there's the cemeteries component of it as well. So Parks and Recreation is a significant portfolio within the Community Services Division. I've probably missed a number of things, but again, you've heard me ramble on many times before. So the department overview. Again, this is very similar to what you've heard me say in the past years and what I've just sort of indicated now. So the staff within community services, and I'll echo it again as to what I just previously said, it by no means is just me. You see my face, unfortunately for yourselves, each and every time that there's a council issue being dealt with, but it truly is the managers and their supervisors and their frontline staff, right from top to bottom, whether they be full-time, whether they be full-time seasonal, whether they be part-time, or whether they be students. You will see on this sheet that there's approximately 250 of them at any given time throughout the course of the year, and it really is all of them that allow us to be responsible for leading, planning, operating, and managing the administration, building and property, customer service, parks and recreation, as well as providing services to the library board. So you will notice earlier, and you may have noticed the change, that we used to have the library division within community services. As per the Provincial Library Act, they must be a standalone body, and therefore they are now at arm's length from the city. And you will be hearing from Jamie Anderson, the library CEO, at a future date when they're providing the library board budget update directly to council. Our biggest emphasis that we do place within our department is on customer service, as well as asset management, and then the financial and human resources management that comes along with that. That is both in terms of just providing information to the customer and the client and the resident, which is a big part of what our customer services division does. But it also then is echoed through how we provide our service to the public in terms of our parks and recreation programming and facilities. And then you take it one step further, and it's also not just to our residents and the public, but it's also internally to our staff, and that's where building and property comes in, by ensuring that we're providing that service to be able, for them to be able to do their jobs, work at the various buildings, and make sure those facilities and assets are maintained from both a capital and operating standpoint. As mentioned, we have roughly 250 full-time, part-time, and seasonal staff at any given time throughout the year. It will fluctuate due to the seasonality of the business that we provide. So obviously we've got park staff that are seasonal or students just through the park season, and then we've got part-time arena staff that only work in the arena season. For the most part, our customer service and building and property staff are year-round. They might be at different levels, whether they be part-time or whether they be full-time, but they're for the most part and predominantly full-time staff. The numbers was a little bit lessened during the pandemic. You'll recall that the city as a corporation made a decision back in, I'll get the year wrong, 2020. I think that's when this pandemic started. I'm losing track of time. Not to hire summer students for that initial summer. So obviously the numbers of staff that year were lower, and it did impact on the services that we were able to provide. So the number during the 2020 year was a bit lower, but the goal for 2022 and what it has been for 2021 is getting back to that 250 level to provide those services that our residents and users of our services expect. Gross expenditures are roughly $15 million, roughly $5 million in revenue, so it's a net of $10 million. That does not include our capital budget predominantly. Again, that was a little bit different throughout the pandemic due to facilities being closed. And I know that our city treasurer talked earlier today about how community services specifically was impacted by a loss of revenues because the facilities were closed, and a little bit of offset with some expenses being saved because facilities were not open. But again, we are trending to get back to the pre-pandemic budget numbers for 2022 and future years. And then again, I talked about capital projects. Roughly there's 50 annual capital projects that we will manage and oversee. That is give or take a few every year, and certainly the size of the projects differs obviously as well. Sometimes we have some very, very large projects that are going on, whether it be the previous construction of the Fenelon Falls Community Center, the Logie Street Park enhancements, the current Bobcaygeon Beach Park project. So there are some very large projects that are happening once in a while, but we do traditionally have probably about 40 or 45 what I'll call relatively small capital projects that are operating every year. That would be something like replacing a playground, fixing some HVAC systems in some of our facilities. Next slide. So throughout the pandemic, I've talked about it, there were some opportunities that we realized, we were actually forced to realize, that allowed us to provide our services through the pandemic. So there were new policies put in place to allow for better registration and tracking for safe use of our facilities and programs. That was both in terms of parks and recreation, so the access into a pool for users to use it, or for various people to access arenas and take part in some community programs that some of the external agencies were offering. But it also applies to facilities such as this at City Hall, where there are now tracking programs in place for people that are coming into the building, whether they're working here or visiting here, and policies that have been put in place. Great help and assistance with our HR department and our health and safety group, but obviously those things was a big impact on the community services department. We have developed some centralized methods for service delivery that have created efficiencies. So specific to that is how we deal with issues and concerns that are being raised by the residents. I talked briefly earlier about our municipal call center. In the past, all staff working at the call center were working out of the Lindsay Service Center at 180 Kent Street. Due to the pandemic and the number of people that are available to be in and working in each facility, we were able to spread that out, and now all of the customer service staff that work at all 4 service centers have the ability to log on and take calls. So that's been a big help with how we provide our services. Also, during the pandemic, we were able to adjust the services for how we provided things. Grass cutting is a primary example, because parks were not able to be used 100% during the pandemic, especially at the beginning of it. With some of the protocols and the restrictions that the province put in place, we were able to save some dollars by limiting the amount of times that grass was being cut. So that did assist us with offsetting some of the revenue losses that the city realized in 2020. We have continued to review and will continue to review our facilities to make better right-size choices for future provisions. Council, you're aware of the decision that the city made last year to not operate our ICE facilities in Bobcaygeon, Oakwood, and Ops. That right-sizing from a standpoint of, due to the pandemic, we didn't necessarily need ICE in all of those locations. And since that time, the corporation has made a decision to close the Ops Community Center permanently. So we are down one, and we are managing with our various user groups for how we can best allocate the ICE across all of our arena facilities to recognize the loss of one ice pad right now. We are anticipating, and this year's season from an ice allocation booking standpoint has been very successful. So all of the other facilities will be either open now or having ice made into them, or in the example of the Bobcaygeon Community Center, ice goes in later on in the year as per normal, and that is still planned. So the ice use is showing to be there, but we have right-sized it from a standpoint of what we did during the pandemic, what we've done with ops, and then continuing to monitor it and work with the user groups as we move forward. And I talked about the service center and the call center functionalities earlier. So again, we adjusted how we were managing the call center, and we've also adjusted, as you're aware, the hours of our service centers currently right now by taking a slow and steady approach to when we did open them. Now that all 4 of them are open, having some operate at a part-time basis, and I know that council has asked the CAO to report back, I believe it's early in the new year, with how that's working so that we can look at it moving forward. So there's been the pandemic, while obviously extremely negative, and it's hard to find any positives out of it, it has assisted in finding some functionality and efficiencies to us, or at least leading us to looking at them moving forward. Some of our 2021 highlights that we have seen this year. I can't be more proud of the Community Services Department for how they have reacted to the pandemic. While all city departments have done yeoman's work in being able to provide their services to the city, Community Services was one that was open extremely early to the public, whether it was looking at Centennial Park Trailer Park and the fact that we opened that fairly early into the pandemic last year when the province allowed us to, and it's been operating this year with its normal dates, and we have staff up there providing that service and working with the residents of the trailer park right away. Arenas have been open for the majority while the protocols allowed, and we've been providing that service. Our call center has been open pretty much the predominant for the entirety of the pandemic as well, and our call center and customer service staff has been managing the various customer concerns and issues that have been raised as we go. Building a property has been on top of trying to stay up to speed with and maintain the various facilities that our public will either access once they have been allowed to access, such as the service center, or also allowing our staff to go to work when they're required to go to work and when they could return to work, whether that again be a service center or a city hall or facilities like that. So we have been, in my opinion, at the forefront of the City of Kawartha Lakes being able to continue to provide various services to our members of the public and our residents. And again, I could not be more proud of them. During the pandemic, we were able to continue with the majority of our capital projects. So it's been good in that sense that we have been able to complete or at least be on schedule for the completion of a number of projects. There are some exceptions that the city made in regards to some major capital projects. I'm sure council is well aware of that. And just very quickly, the rationale for why we did some of those things was because many of those big contracts, big projects, have contractors coming from out of the City of Kawartha Lakes, predominantly from areas or zones or regions way back when the province was in a color system that were what was classified as those red zones. And the province had asked or had even stated that travel was not something that was frowned upon. So to support that provincial mandate and to keep our public safe, we did delay some projects where we knew the contractor was coming from what was deemed to be a red zone to, again, try to keep the City of Kawartha Lakes as safe as we could. And we have been trying to manage that as we go forward. But for the most part, our capital projects, as you're aware of what's going on within City Hall with the City Hall HVAC program, are moving forward. And then the final thing is, again, sort of echoing what the first point was. Staff of the department, in my opinion, went well above and beyond to work to continue to allow the city to provide much needed municipal services. And that's both for our staff and the community. And it is recognized, too, that a lot of those are what we'll call soft services. They're not mandated services that must be provided, but I think if you talk with much of the public and many of our residents, they will tell you that some of those services, especially during the time of the pandemic when a lot of options were limited to them, they were very grateful for, and they continued to ask us to provide more services so they had something to do for their mental health and mental well-being. Last slide is on our 2022 highlights. So we are working to reopening all of our services and getting the community back to normal where feasible and within provincial protocols. So we do know of the province's most recent policy in regards to mandatory vaccination. We are continuing to work with the province and with our health unit on how we can do that. And I can guarantee you that from a staff perspective, anything that we can do that is within provincial protocols to continue to support and allow for active participation amongst our public is something that we are very eager to do, as well as opening services such as just earlier this month, opening up the Bobcaygeon and Omimi service centers to better service the north and eastern areas of the City of Kawartha Lakes from customers and clients that need to walk in. We will continue to review various other services to try to bring them back more online with pre-pandemic ways so that, again, we can provide those services that our residents are very eager to have back. Another 2022 highlight is the implementation and completion of some of our key and significant city capital projects. So I think you're well aware of what they are, but Bobcage and Beach Park, I know, is a heavy topic, and it's something that we are very urgently working towards getting completed, and we are gearing towards the summer of next year, have that project complete and park reopened. The Bobcage and Library expansion and relocation, that tender for that work is imminent for release. I would imagine either potentially this week or next week, so that work can take place and the Bobcage and Library can be relocated during the 2022 year and provide almost three times the amount of public library space within Bobcage. And the current City Hall upgrade project, which is going on right now with an HVAC system, and we're near closing up on this phase and getting ready to move into the next phase. And then we will continue to review city programs and facilities from a standpoint of right-sizing and making more efficient. Again, I know that some other departments have previously mentioned that style of 2022 highlight or goal, and I'm sure some other departments will later on today. But that is something that we will continue to do, whether it's 2022 or 2023 or 2032 for that matter. That's an ongoing thing that the department takes great pride in and will continue to do. And with that, Mr. Mayor, that completes the presentation, and I'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Well done. I have a quick question first. Just when you're talking on your 22 highlights, I know I've seen some emails going back and forth. Can you just offer us and then anybody who's listening some clarity on the arena situation with the provincial protocols that you don't really know where we are? Can you just give me a 2-minute brief so we're all sort of on the same page with that message right now? I know it's a tough one. Go ahead.
To you, Mr. Mayor, and to Council. So you're right, it is a difficult one. I do know that the province today, just prior to me leaving my office, I saw an email that in fact the province has issued the regulations for the protocol. So that's a huge, and for the policy, so that's a huge plus. Have not had a chance to completely review it yet. I know that our staff in Parks and Recreation, as well as our health and safety team and the pandemic recovery team, is reviewing it. It's going to be discussed later on this week. But there is a policy which the province has put in place. We will be mandated to follow that policy as a public facility. And that's pretty much the basis of it. So once we have the nuts and bolts of the policy and a better understanding, again, as said earlier, whatever the policy allows us to continue to encourage active recreation, active participation, we will certainly do so as long as council is supportive of that. But there are going to be some restrictions. We know for sure that the province has put in place, and as a public facility, we will have to enact what that policy is.
If by possible, maybe for council next week, even in announcements, if you could give us an update, just a verbal update at that time, you'll have some more information. So if you can think you can make that work, it'd be appreciated. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a very brief comment. You took away my number one go-to guy, and now Karen's going to have to retrain me.
To you, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council. So I believe what Councillor Dunn is talking about is there's been some recent shuffling of supervisor positions within the Parks and Recreation Division. Ryan Smith, who was the previous Parks and Open Space supervisor, has become our capital projects supervisor, and I'll get the titles wrong, so I'm going to apologize to Ryan and then to Karen and some of the other staff right away if I've got their exact title incorrect. But Ryan's become our capital project supervisor within Parks and Rec, and Karen is becoming our Lindsay Parks supervisor and moving out of her temporary role as the Recreation Complex Services supervisor, because Heidi is coming back from her maternity leave to fill that existing role. So there's been a shift of 3 people. Luckily, again, as I said it earlier, the entire team that I have in community services is fantastic. So the service will continue to be provided in a high way. But Ryan, if you're listening, take that as kudos to you from Councillor Dunn.
And I assume you won't take personnel recommendations from Councillor Dunn. Thank you. Councillor Helmsley, go ahead.
Thank you. Just on that note, is Rod still in his role?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. So Rod Porter, I think, is who you're. No, so Ryan Smith has taken that role. Rod previously, probably about 2 months ago, shifted from Parks and Recreation within Community Services over to Public Works. And again, I'll get his exact title wrong now, but it's basically the manager of fleet is what Rod is.
Wow. Good to know. Just a couple of things, Craig. I know you have to rush out. I wanted to say a big thank you to you and your staff for the public washrooms and the changing rooms that were completed this year in Fenland. They have received many positive comments in the community, and job well done, and thank everybody for the work they've done. I also wanted to ask about, you mentioned City Hall in 2022. Are we going to see the end of the City Hall projects in 2022, or is this going to be a continuing saga?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the council member, I know that City Hall capital projects are an ongoing frustration for council. They are for staff as well. But I can tell you, and I'm not trying to blow it up bigger than it is, the HVAC component of the project will be done in 2022. And that's going to create a much better facility for staff working within it, as well as for visitors and councils for their sessions. With the age of this facility, though, roughly 100 years old, there will always be capital projects and capital components related to this facility, and as we move forward, that ties to just the general age of the facility, but also as the city changes. I know that there was a discussion during the morning session about how the pandemic and working from home and any future policies might impact the city and our staff. If that opportunity presents itself, that more staff can work from home, there will probably need to be capital projects to then better suit this facility for what the uses of it will be, because I believe it's always going to be City Hall, and if we don't need 500 square feet of space for office space, then we'll be looking at what's the best use for that 500 square feet, and there's obviously going to be some capital projects. So the answer to your question is a little bit of yes and a little bit of no.
Thank you. And one last thing, we seem to have a lot of dead trees in the parks, and I don't expect you to have an answer to this question off the top, but if somebody could get back to me maybe. We have done some tree removal, but there are still some dead trees there, and we were hit with the double whammy of the gypsy moth this year as well, and my understanding is a tree could survive one go from a gypsy moth infestation, but if it gets a second one, probably won't survive. Do we have a program for spraying for gypsy moth that we will be implementing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, we don't, that I'm aware of, have a specific program for managing gypsy moth. But what we do have is we've got a program for capital replacement of trees as they're required on city property. We've also in the past, and will continue to for a little bit, have a project to deal with some of the other diseases that impact our trees across the city. And instead of canceling that, because that particular issue is dead or gone, what we are intending to do is sort of to roll those two projects into one, so that we've got that same value of funding that we have, but then we can better manage the various projects that are out there and as they come to be. I can certainly tell you that from a pure customer concern standpoint, with the number of items that are logged through the city and specifically through our call center, the primary reason for Parks and Rec, or the item within Parks and Rec, is trees. So there is a backlog of tree issues, and our arborists are working away at that, but it's a huge list, and we have a number of tree issues, and we try to manage that in a number of different ways. So the first thing we have to do is determine, is that in fact a city tree? So is it on city property? So many times it's just an inspection that we provide. If it's on city property and an immediate hazard, we will do our best to deal with it right away. And oftentimes that is use of our own internal arborists. Sometimes though it is contracting out to a private tree arborist that we will need. If it's not a hazard issue, a lot of times it just remains on the list until such a time that we can get to it to deal with it. And sometimes that is months down the road because we have to deal with those hazard issues first. Your other point of the number of dead trees does relate to some of those other diseases that have been throughout the city as well, and we're trying to manage them as we go. And then the last comment I'll say is going back to your first comment, and I know I made this statement at our Power Links committee last week. I will make sure that the thanks goes on to the Parks and Rec staff, specifically Jen Johnson, Rod Porter, even though he's not there anymore, and Kevin Brazier, because I had actually nothing to do with the Fenland Falls Garnet Graham washrooms, and they deserve the full credit. So again, if they're not watching today, I will make sure that they get that thanks, because it's well deserved.
I think we spent a lot of money in Fenland Falls lately. It's time to move on somewhere else, right? Maybe up to Coboconk or something, eh?
It's only
All right.
appropriate.
All right. Totally inappropriate. Any other questions? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
It's just a comment. I just want to tell you how many people have told me that the other parks in the area are beautiful because I've sent them to other areas. So kudos to you guys for people coming back and saying what great parks we have in the area. So I want to say thanks, and I know how frustrating the entire project has been at Beach Park. And so thank you for your patience and your diligence on that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Shanks, and to your staff, obviously. I'll get a motion to receive the Community Services 2022 budget overview, please. Councillor O'Reilly, second by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much. 1:31, you're right on time. Thanks for doing that, and appreciate it. We'll move down to the next one, 4.5, is Richard Hawley in the House.
Just as an update, Mr. Mayor, you're no longer supposed to call it the Gypsy Moths, it's derogatory. So it's called the LDD Moth now until they come up with a new name. That's the epitome of political correctness.
Okay, I did not know that. There you go. Take your time, Richard, whenever you're ready. This is the presentation for Development Services 2022 budget overview. I'll turn it over to Acting Director of Development Services, Richard Hawley, whenever he's ready.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of Council, for the opportunity to allow us to present our budget for this year. With me, I see here I've got a number of my staff. I've got Sherry Ray and Leah Berry and Rebecca Mustard on here with me. So, okay, so. All right, as you see, there's our organizational chart. We have 4 divisions within Development Services. There's the Planning Division, the Building and Septic Division, Mapping and GIS, Economic Development. I will go to the next one. So from a development overview perspective, the Planning Division deals with all planning applications. They deal with all planning policy work. Any studies that are related to development and planning policy as well. We also process applications and take them through the various committees. The Building and Septic Division looks after processing building permits as well as septic permits. The Mapping and GIS Division look after all things GIS, so they prepare mapping for the various divisions within Development Services. They look after street addressing and making sure that gets sort of up and running. They're also looking at some projects with respect to streamlining getting street-based information and 911 information to our police services. And last but not least, economic development. They do a lot of work for us. They deal a lot with business development, strategic thinking in that regard. Arts and culture is also one of their areas. Small business development. We also have someone that's responsible for workforce planning. Agriculture, one of our biggest industries, they deal with that, as well as tourism, and a new part to their business is going to be curatorial services shortly. And heritage, yes, very important. So, pandemic opportunities. So, the team really pulled together during the pandemic. We had a lot of different stresses in terms of what the pandemic sort of provided to us, and I'm happy to say that the team really pulled together to come up with a lot of new processes, a lot of innovations. One of the things that came out and that Rebecca Mustard chaired was the Economic Recovery Task Force, and that sort of looked at three different areas. It looked at the planning development area, so looked at planning processes, and one of the things that came out was the Concierge program. Looked at critical infrastructure investments and also business recovery support. Our building and septic division was really challenged. They had their operations in a number of different service centers. They had to bring everything together and consolidate it in Lindsay for a short period of time. But because construction was still mandated by the province, they had to quickly develop SOPs to still keep inspections moving. So they really did a great job in terms of still keeping the process going by making sure that all the development community knew that they had to remain safe during the inspection process. They also initiated different payment intake processes to allow for virtual or online payments to be made. The use of technology to adapt to a hybrid work model was really something that spanned all of the different divisions. Obviously, I do want to say a great thank you to the IT division. They really made the online work experience workable. It was a bit of a struggle at first, but when they got everything working, it really worked well. So obviously, we did everything virtually. So using the Zoom platform, we accommodated virtual meetings, so virtual planning advisory committee meetings, committee of adjustment meetings, any divisional meetings, developer meetings. We also started and developed electronic circulations, which we're still doing, and I think that's one of the things that we will continue to do even post-pandemic. It's just way more efficient. Those people that need paper can still get it. As well as use of digital signatures and consent certificates. I don't think we would have been able to register a single consent during the height of the pandemic if it hadn't have been for that. We also launched the Summer Tourism Experience Program for the different chambers, so that was something that came out of the Economic Recovery Task Force, and it provided some support funding to allow the chambers to hire students to help with tourism and helping tourists sort of navigate the downtown areas. The Concierge pilot program and planning applications database, those are some of the recommendations that came out of the Economic Recovery Task Force. The Concierge program was run by Emily Turner, and we sort of piloted 5 site plans. So the larger site plans to sort of help the developers sort of with the process. We will be bringing a report back through Planning Advisory Committee now that the pilot is completed, and be reporting back through that either in October or November at a PAC meeting to sort of go through the program and sort of try to set a path forward for it. The Skills Development Fund, so it's a joint venture between the city and Fleming College, and it provides simulated training for skills development to help us improve our skill trades in areas where they are lacking. The Kawartha Farm Fest, so basically getting the farmers markets going again. Kelly Maloney did a huge amount of work in terms of developing COVID safety plans and getting those Farm Fest areas moving again. Cultural sector recovery funding, something that came out of the Economic Recovery Task Force as well, and that was a huge boost to our cultural sector. And a final bullet that it's not on there, but we did pass a temporary use bylaw to allow for patios, outdoor patios. So some of our patios, for example, just across the street here, they are allowed to be there, and that bylaw, I think, is good for this year as well as next year. It was kind of one of those things where the province said you don't have to worry about public consultation, and so we were able to pass these temporary use bylaws. And it was a great thing because, you know, we had a lot of uptake on those, and these are for patios on private property as opposed to on the sidewalk. So Juan mentioned this morning his program is on the sidewalk or on the right of way. These are on private property. So to go to our 2021 highlights, the Building and Septic Division is experiencing a high volume of construction, and really the pandemic has really brought, I think, a lot more interest to the city as a whole. We're experiencing fairly high call volumes and higher application numbers, and I think this will really manifest itself this year and probably next year for fairly high building permit our high construction volumes, so there's going to be a lot of building permits issued. So I feel that you know, from a financial perspective, I think this will help the city quite a bit. We've had to, because of the higher application and inquiry volumes, we've had to hold larger public meetings. So both Planning Advisory Committee as well as Committee of Adjustment to move some of those projects forward. Prioritizing and shifting work. What we've had to do is initially when the pandemic started and through the Economic Recovery Task Force, we sort of worked on shifting some of our resources to work on the larger projects, so high density residential projects. So some of those are the high density projects on the old fairgrounds. We recently approved the 8-story building for Fieldgate just north of the Loblaws, so that will be starting. So that's an example of where we sort of moved and worked on those larger projects. We also did some work on advancing the background work for the city's official plan review. Our official plan is going to be 10 years old next year, and we are going to have to review it again. There's a lot of background work that has to go into that. So basically the launch of the growth management strategy project is one of the key components of that. What the growth management strategy will do is it will identify the population increases and the employment increases that the province has given us, and it will basically come up with a blueprint on where those should go. And that is being worked on as well in coordinated fashion with the engineering group, the servicing master plan as well. The active transportation plan is also going to be started this year. It's going to be started shortly. I think our purchasing department is ready to let that is ready to sign the tender with the company, so that that will be started this year as well. The rural zoning bylaw consolidation project sort of started back up again earlier on this year. We had a couple of open houses which were really well received, and this was sort of another example of the virtual the virtual environment. We had over 100 people take part in that virtual open house. It's the most that we've ever had for a single sort of planning event. So don't know if that says anything about planning, but it certainly was good to get that to have that much interest in the project. Streamlining telecommunications and pre-consultation approval process, that was really needed. We have a lot of, I think what the pandemic has also stressed is that we need to upgrade our internet and telecommunication services. We had a couple of large providers come to us, and on that basis, we started taking them out, taking telecom applications out of the regular process and putting them on a fast track process, as well as the approval process that the director now has the ability to sign, and I'm happy to say I signed my first consent letter a couple of weeks ago. We've also made some improvements to our website to put more information on there. More documents are on there now. More applications, updated guides and things like that are now on there as well. A lot of the parts of this are from our economic development group, who've been working very hard on various different things last year as well. So the destination development plan was completed. That's really a sort of a 5-year tourism blueprint for the next 5 years on developing our tourism industry. We did 2 intakes were completed for the $1 million makeover. So that's sort of signage and facade improvements and things like that. And a total of $75,000 in grants were approved. We launched the inaugural business count program, and what the purpose of that is to canvass all of our businesses and industries to see number of employees and find out a lot of information like that. Skills advanced workforce training. Again, it provides some training for new employees within those economic sectors. Upgrades to policies, so the heritage applications and the public art policies received a major overhaul this year by Emily and Donna. Film feasibility study was launched as well, and that provides us with some information on and direction on if we want to get the film industry coming to City Kawartha Lakes, what are the things that we need to do and how can we accommodate them. The relaunch of Kawartha Farm Fresh, that is a program that's jointly done between ourselves as well as other areas. That was relaunched this year as well, and it provides a lot of tools to the agricultural industry. Creation and launch of the Kawartha Lakes Signature Experience Program, and the website and local food program was also launched as well. So some of the 2022 highlights. The Building and Septic Division will continue to have very high volumes, and we'll probably have continue to have a lot of building permits submitted. We have some large developments that are sort of coming through the pipeline, and there will be a lot of work for that division. The planning division is also likely going to have a fair bit of work in 2022 as well with some larger developments. I think we're going to have the tribute application that's probably coming through at the end of the year, early next year. We're in bi-weekly discussions with them on advancing that development, and when that comes in, it'll be about 3,000 units. We continue to fill staffing vacancies to address our workload issues. We still have some vacancies in the planning division, as well as the building division and the GIS division. Some of the things on our work program for next year include the tree preservation program. That's been something that has had a lot of interest by a number of different groups, including our Environmental Advisory Committee. Once we get a policy person hired back on, that will be a very important thing to start again next year. Then we get into some of the next three sort of studies are some of the background for the official plan review, sort of commercial policy review. That's very important in urban areas. And the natural heritage and agricultural system studies, that deals with the mapping that was prepared by the province a couple of years ago. And we do need to implement that. And 2022 will also see the Healthy Environment Plan implementation sort of move ahead and start forward. The Cultural Center Feasibility Plan has been initiated and will continue on in next year. That's a study to determine how our cultural center should be organized within the city. And then finally, completion of the Old Mill Heritage Conservation District. It's a project by Emily Turner under the Heritage Act, and we are looking to finalize that and complete that as well. And with that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. How's our policy work coming? I know Leah's acting manager of planning. We lost a body in policy, so are we sort of putting that on hold to focus on applications, or are we continuing in the background with some of the policy work? Because I remember you told me good policy makes good planning, so
that's true.
I don't want to fall behind. So can you update us on that?
The policy work has been put on hold, and Leah is doing the work that she needs to do to keep things going. Primarily, her focus right now is on the OLT proceedings for the secondary plans. That's what it's taking up a lot of her time. But you know, there is opportunity where there's opportunity. She's doing some additional policy work, but her main focus right now is on the secondary plans.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question? Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. I'm going to go backwards so I can remember. The tree preservation program.
Right.
I've had inquiries over the last 6-8 months about a canopy program. Would that be what we're talking about there, where we're trying to increase the canopy, the tree canopy of the city?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I believe that's sort of a similar idea, although I think the canopy program is probably more about planting additional trees, I think. I know that there's some interest in Bobcaygeon on that, and I think there is some interest here as well in Lindsay. But I think that sort of focuses more on I think additional planting as well. So
okay,
it's
because
sort
I've been
of two
asking
things.
parks. I guess I should have been asking
Yeah.
you guys. My second question is when you talked about the bylaw that goes through until 2022. So just so I've got it clear in my mind, that's things like over the liquor store parking lot where you've got the Halibut House, you got Sensations, I think it is. You got a couple of restaurants in a row where they've extended out onto the sidewalk. Are they not allowed to do that on a regular basis without the bylaw backing them up?
Correct. So they're not allowed to be on parking spaces.
Okay, all right.
And because if you have additional space now, it under the bylaw, it requires additional parking. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So, for example, the LCBO Plaza,
Yeah.
the amount of parking it has there is based on the floor space. So when you sort of expand patio areas, that's more floor space as well. So as a temporary measure right now for the next 2 years, they're allowed to be there, so.
Perfect, okay. I wasn't quite sure about that. I kind of guessed the parking lot stuff, such as at Boston, Pizza, but I wasn't too sure. So even with the sidewalks, they would, okay.
Yeah.
And my third question is, we're doing a lot of development. Carolyn was touting and actually and engineering as well about how our development charges are keeping up. How are our building inspectors keeping up? Do they need more help?
Through the mayor, Yes, I believe we have been allowed to hire an additional inspector. But yes, we are recruiting right now, and we'll see how things go in the next year. But yes, inspections, you can always use more help. I think where I think we want to sort of see how it goes is when we start getting those bigger projects, the high density projects, and how those inspections go. We'll have to sort of see how that works itself out.
Yeah, because I would assume that if development charges are doubling, so is the workload for the building inspectors.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I was confused on the zoning as well. So it's like Boston Pizza, their restaurant has to have X number of parking places. When they put tents in their parking area, they're losing some of those parking places, so they're not compliant with the zoning. So you waive the zoning bylaw temporarily to allow them to have less parking spaces and increase their restaurant use. So that's, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's why it's a temporary waiving of it. So that was explained to me and it made more sense. So thanks. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Richard, for your presentation, and certainly to your staff for all their hard work over the last year and a half. I know everybody's been stressed and strained, and certainly appreciate everything they've done, and I know they're under the gun. I was pleased to see that you spoke about your ongoing efforts in recruitment, and Councillor Dunn asked about building inspectors, and of course I've talked to you in the past about more planners, and so we could manage some of these applications more speedily. And I'm hoping that in your budget for 2022 that you've allowed for increased staff in order to try and keep up with the demand. So I certainly would be supportive of anything you did along those lines, and wanted to tell you that, and don't know if you have a comment on it or not.
Through the mayor to the councillor, we have been granted permission for a third planner one. One of the things right now that we're really trying to manage is all the inquiries and the follow-ups. I think if we get a third planner one, that will really help to create a team that is really focused on those planning inquiries. And if the more people we have, I think for that, I think the better it's going to be, and that will allow our planners to focus on applications. That's been part of the problem right now, is they're not being able to focus on the application. So allowing for that additional body there, I think will help, and we'll sort of see how that helps us. I
appreciate you being aggressive on that aspect, because I really think we need to get a handle on our applications and on turning around some of these things a bit more speedily. Just a couple of other questions. The secondary plan, I had asked this morning where the budget sits for the secondary plan in terms of legal costs and consultant costs, and I wasn't sure whether it was in Ms. Carlson's budget or your budget, but I would enjoy seeing those numbers if it's in your budget. So hopefully when the budget comes forward, anything you have towards secondary plan, if it could be highlighted, I would dearly love to see it. The other thing I wanted to know, and I haven't heard for a couple of years, is RED funding still available, or has that program lapsed, or what? Do you know where it stands?
Through the mayor to the councillor, yes, some of our economic development projects still have RED funding. What the future of it is, that I don't know. We can find out unless perhaps Rebecca, if you might be able to answer that one, please.
Through the mayor, I believe there is actually a RED application that's out right now, the application period. The program is continuing, and we currently have a RED funded program that will take place this year and into next year as well, a business and workforce attraction marketing campaign.
Thank you, good to know. And I guess my last question was much along the lines is the tree preservation program. I had asked Director Shanks about, and I know I'm going to incur Councillor Yo's wrath by still calling it the gypsy moth infestation. Does the tree preservation program look after spraying of trees to protect against that, or is it something entirely different?
Through the mayor to the councillor, no, it does not look at spraying. Spraying would be a private matter.
Okay, thanks, and thanks to you for your help and in returning all my silly phone calls.
There's a comment I could make there, but I won't. Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Richard. Just two questions. The first one is the rural zoning bylaw. I was at a meeting in Downeyville in 2019, and we engaged the services of a consultant from Kitchener, Ontario, and they had said that it would be done within 24 months max. I'm just wondering, like, what's the goal here now for a completion of that project? Because a lot of things hinge on that.
Through the mayor to the councillor. Yes, it was initially, it was thought that it would be done sooner. We probably lost about a year to the pandemic. We restarted it this year. I would, there's a tentative time of sort of Q1 next year, but I'm not sure that it's going to get finished by then. I think though it will get done in 2022. We have a draft released right now, and that is going to be going to the task force, and it's going to be opened for public review. We need to have some good review on that one so that we try to minimize as many issues so that we don't end up at the tribunal with that.
And finally, the turnaround time. We talked about turnaround time, people who put applications in. I know you're short-staffed, but I have a few examples where they put applications in March and they've paid and they haven't even heard back, but that's hopefully slipped through the cracks. But as far as applicants, whether you're a big applicant, a big developer, or you're a mom and pop developer or a single applicant, you don't really give a timeline on each one of those? Like, they're all treated equally, in other words, are they not, as far as what their turnaround time is? Because it's important that the public knows that they get a decent turnaround time. I know you're working on it, but what are your plans for that to improve that turnaround time?
Through the mayor to the councillor, as I say, one of the problems that we've had is volume, as well as not allowing the planners to focus on processing those applications. So we're hoping that once we're fully staffed up, plus we have the third planner one, that will allow us to have the planner twos taken out of the whole customer service rotation. And then they'll be able to focus on especially the committee of adjustment work as well. It's, all the applications are treated the same, and I know that there are some areas where we haven't been able to get at those applications, but the idea is that we get back to those.
I think the CEO wants to comment as well. Go ahead.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So totally agree with the comments that were made there. Just want to remind as well, at the same time, as you can appreciate, when we were entering the spring season, knowing the resource constraints and the volume, I think I characterized this at council as the perfect storm sort of in the development world. We did have to make some hard decisions. There's no getting away from that. And the director hasn't touched on that entirely. But we had to sort of make the decision. You've seen it in the slides. Things like shovel-ready projects, we tried to methodically go through and make sure if they had an opportunity to be shovel in the ground this year in order to meet other economic objectives. They did get prioritization. So again, it has been a bit of a balancing act in the last 2 years, I would suggest. What we're learning very clearly, though, is that there's no end in sight. The pressures are going to be there in 2022, and I would suggest beyond. And so I'm glad we're starting to look at how we responded in the immediate term, and we will get back to that more sort of equitable approach, I would like to hope, through a combination of resources and then managing the overall volume better.
So we haven't created a two-tier system, whereas, and I hope we haven't, because we introduced this thing in this policy in council about a year ago. I didn't vote for it, but council voted for it, which is fine. That if you paid an upfront fee, you would be processed quicker. Has that not helped your processing time with that new? I forget the name of the exact program, but a developer or an applicant would pay an extra fee on top of their fee in order to process their applicant. It's sort of a pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-play, if you will. That's what it is. I mean, it was passed, and that was supposed to speed up development, but it kind of creates a two-tier system, in my opinion. Maybe wrong, hopefully I'm wrong, but can you sort of elaborate on that?
Through the mayor to the councillor, that was for zoning compliance letters. And we're getting higher volumes of those again. But that was sort of a rush fee so that they could be done within a couple of days. We have a lot of real estate closings are happening very quickly, and we were getting a lot of pressure, so that's why we introduced that fee.
That's not a planning applications. That was strictly
No,
on.
that
There's
is
no
strictly
two-tier system for
yeah.
planning applications. That's not what we were creating there. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
No, it was for zoning compliance letters only.
Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. So I think maybe the other reference might be through our building bylaw. There was provision put in by council in previous year for applicant paid services to do certain works and inspections. As I'm to understand now, that's been in for, I believe, 2 building seasons. We haven't had a single request for that or uptake for that. It has all been internal resources. But I think that's the other sort of pay-to-play system, if I can put it that way, to look at sort of more broad-based inspection type and review services for engineering drawings and plans and so on.
Okay, got a bunch more questions. Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Just one quick one, so you to Richard. The growth management strategy, you just touched on it. Where's it at and how do you see it rolling out in the near future?
Through the mayor to the councillor, it has started. We have retained our consultants, and we are reviewing internally a draft document at this time. On September, council will be appointing the task force members to that, and then we will have our first task force meeting, I think tentatively scheduled at the end of September. From there on, the discussion paper will roll out and we will have public engagement sessions. It's probably going to go for another 1.5 years or so, but it will be working in tandem with the servicing master plan and all of the. So we've been gathering various different requests from developers or individuals for expansions or additional units, and we've referred them now to the growth management strategy.
Councillor Yeo, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I know there's been lots of delays due to COVID and stuff. Has the Building Code Act or anything, has it been suspended in any way? Because I keep telling customers of mine and people and constituents and builders who call to complain about the delays to ensure that they have a completed and very important, a complete application. So are the legislative timelines still in effect, I guess is my question. Because if it's a complete application, then it's got to be responded to by law.
Yes.
In a certain time period. So is that still in effect?
Through the mayor to the councillor, I believe so, yes it is. I don't believe there was a suspension to the Building Code Act.
Councillor Seymour Fagan.
Yes, thank you. Richard, I think maybe at planning, you explained to us why we can't find planners. And I don't think all of council knows, because I always thought, oh, why can't we just hire consultants? So I think maybe explain to all of council why we can't just get people immediately.
Through the mayor to the councillor. Yeah, we've had some challenge with recruitment. It's hard to explain. It's hard to explain sort of why we haven't been able to get them. But yeah, I think the policy planner we've sent out 3 times now, and we haven't been able to find a person. So I think we're probably going to have to look at that one internally to sort of see how we deal with that position. Do we reposition it, or what do we do?
But all the municipalities are in the same situation due to the growth, right? So it's not just us.
That's correct. Yes, I think a lot of area municipalities and consultants are struggling to find help in this area. Certainly what I've heard from other people as well.
Councillor, we're going to get a staffing update in closed session at council, so there'll be some, I think we can ask the CAO some questions at that point about some of the challenges we're having moving forward, so.
Yes, thank you. And one other question. Have you slept at all since taking on the new role?
Through the mayor, yes, I have.
Just not at work, right?
True.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question. Go ahead.
Just because we're on YouTube and we no longer have reporters here where we can explain things to them, would you please explain to the viewing public what a compliance letter is, so that they don't think that we have a pay-for-play system in the city of Kawartha Lakes? Would you explain exactly what they're talking about?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Mayor. So a compliance letter is really a verification letter from the city that something complies with the bylaws that are in place. So it's a common practice. Planning will process these as part of real estate transactions. So it's to say that the property that's being purchased, for example, is in compliance with zoning bylaws and any other applicable bylaws if they ask. And we issue those as part of that real estate transaction process.
That's what I have for questions. So can I get a motion for the Development Services 2022 budget overview to be received, please? Councillor Elmsley and Ashmore. Any further questions for Richard or staff? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, sir, for your update, and thank you to your staff for tuning in. Pleasure. Okay, we're going to move on to, and then we'll take a short break after this one. 4.6, Fire Services 2022 budget overview. Terry Jones is the acting fire chief. I know he's not around this week, but I'm going to turn it over to Ron Taylor to make the introductions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. And so I apologize for the quick delay. We've got staff coming and going for those that can't sort of view and see entirely in the council chambers, just to make sure that we're complying with our occupancy requirements. So the next presentation and overview you're going to hear is from Fire Services, their overall budget. As you know, the current acting chief, Terry Jones, he sends his regrets. He's actually was already scheduled out of province this week, was going to try to tune in and listen, and certainly is planning to. I've had a number of conversations with him as well. He will be coming back through to council for some conversations this fall. And so for today, I want to introduce a couple of staff from the fire service. So Deputy Chief Cam Smith is here with us today, and he's actually going to give the presentation on Terry's behalf for fire service. And joining him here in the chamber as well is Valerie Knight, the honorary chief, probably of most services throughout the city, and certainly I'm glad that you were able to come up here today, Valerie, because just personally, from my own perspective, I just want to commend you and congratulate you for some of the efforts that you've done sort of that aren't in your job description with me, with the Emergency Operations Center. Because again, I mentioned to council, we've looked at this pandemic through that Emergency Operations Center lens and so on. And Valerie has been just invaluable in the background supporting that. So I truly thank you for that, and thanks for coming today. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to maybe the rookie for presentations to do the fire service overview. Thank you.
Definitely the rookie, as Terry calls me, the acting fire chief when he's away. So it's fun. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Council. It's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time meeting pretty much all of you. I think I've met Councillor Dunn before, I've met Mr. Mayor before, and obviously Ron, so it is a pleasure to be here. So we're going to do our Fire Services 2022 budget overview for you now, just as everybody else has been doing this morning and this afternoon. In our org chart, we have 5 divisions. We have the Administrative Division, Fire Prevention Division, Emergency Management, the our area-rated fire suppression division, and now our training division as well, which was implemented 2 years ago. So the administration division does provide all of our overall leadership and direction and planning for the fire services. It ensures that we comply to the FPPA, the Fire Protection and Prevention Act, as well as the Emergency Management Act and the Civil Protection Act. Fire Prevention Division, they reduce our fire loss through injuries and deaths through fire prevention and public education, and keeping the public informed of anything that's new on the horizon for fire prevention initiatives. The emergency management program, actually headed up by, or for us, is Val is a huge part of our emergency management program, and that ensures that our municipality meets the essential level and the provincially mandated requirements of the EMO and the Civil Protections Act. Our fire suppression services, they're responsible for the mitigation of all our fires and rescues and incidences that occur in the city, and we look after any risk to life and property, and we try and mitigate those. And our training division, which is new, and our training officer, Chris Hirschwood, he is responsible for the development and implementation of our firefighter training programs. Throughout the pandemic, we've run into some challenges with some of those areas. One being our firefighter training. We had to move it to an online platform for some time when we were shut down during the pandemic. So we actually were able to put programs in place through some online free programs using a Moodle-based approach that allowed our firefighters to do some training at home. It wasn't ideal, but it actually did help, and we were able to get some good training in. We did have a change to our medical response and our protocols, which has subsequently now changed back to post kind of what we were doing pre-COVID, and we've now switched that back as well. We were able to maintain sufficient PPE levels all throughout the pandemic, and we still continue to do so. And we've even enhanced those, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And we've maintained our existing service levels to the public while we've been closed. Actually, we've gotten a little bit better at some of those as well by putting some things online. Some of the highlights we got an Ontario Fire Marshal grant that allowed us to do some more online training with our firefighters. That grant has enabled us to get our manuals, the IFSTA manuals that we use. We've got a subscription so that now every firefighter can actually get online and read every IFSTA manual, whatever they need, and they have it in a ready format for them at all times. We've moved to virtual inspections with our fire prevention division and through public education as well. We actually finalized a collective agreement with our volunteers this year as well. That was a huge commitment, kind of the end of 2019 into 2020 and then into 2021. It did take a while, but we finalized that this year. We've got iPads coming for our fire prevention division, which is another enhancement for them to do some of their online and virtual inspections. We did receive some more grant money. I know the CAO spoke to it earlier this morning about our fire modernization review, which is actually underway in the preliminary stages, and we have a meeting this week about that. We also opened a new fire station, amalgamating Station 10 and 11 and creating Station 21 in Mariposa. We've also got brand new SCBA equipment throughout the city, which was a huge initiative and a capital purchase that we finalized this year, and it's a great advancement for our health and safety of our firefighters as well. Coming up in 2022, procurement and implementation of a records management program. So we're in the need of a new records management program. So Val, that RFQ has gone out, I believe, has it not? Or is going to? No, it's pending the budget approval and a goal for an pending budget approval, we'll go out for an RFP. I'm learning as I go too. And the testing for our firefighters for Nfpa certification. So we're starting this year in October. We have our first test with AS&E, which is the testing branch for the Fire Marshal's office. And they'll be coming out doing some of our firefighters and our recruits from this year. And then next year we have 4 dates that we're just waiting on them to approve, and we'll get more. That'll give us up to 160 more firefighters next year that can apply for certification that don't already have it. We have a lot of firefighters that are already certified either through grandfathering or they've gone to college and done it on their own. That's pretty much it. Really, for me, I wanted to just kind of pass on something Terry and I were speaking about, was really just thanking all of our staff, inside staff and outside staff and our frontline staff throughout the pandemic. Just an amazing job they've all done, and they've, you know, adjusted every step of the way. And I think the city is very proud, and hopefully is very proud of the job that they've done. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor. Any questions?
Thank you, sir. So can you just elaborate a little bit on the NFPA certification? So what does that mean? You say we're going to have another 160 certified firefighters. Will that be on top of the volunteers we already have, or we have some who don't meet a certain level of certification?
So certification in the province isn't yet mandatory. It's something that we're moving forward with. And through the grandfathering process, if you had 5 years prior to 2013, you could get grandfathered. And anybody after that time frame, they did do another one, but they didn't change the dates. So we do have some firefighters we've hired since then that now we put them through the process with their recruit training, and we're going to hopefully get them all certified to level 1, and then we'll move forward throughout the certifications. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Question, Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, and through you, yeah, thanks for everything you guys do and keeping us all safe. We appreciate it. And kudos to the folks who did the rescue up in Norland last week. Sounds like it was a hairy situation, and they did a great job, so kudos to them. I just wanted to ask you a question about the records management. We heard from the treasurer this morning that they're moving forward with records management. Is there any opportunities for synergy there, or is it a completely different type of records and you have to get your own system?
Good afternoon. It's something to look at. I don't know if in reality it's a possibility, because a lot of the benchmarkings that we collect in our records management system are on behalf of the Ontario Fire Marshal and have to be transmitted to the Fire Marshal on a quarterly basis. So if it had a capability of doing that, we could piggyback on that, but we'd probably have to look at it, and I'm not sure.
Okay. Any further questions for Cam or Val? Councillor Seymour Fagan?
Yes, thank you, through you. Thank you. I'm wondering about the radios. Will they be, because they're not on the same system as everyone else now, right? Okay, so is that part of the whole, what is it, the review that you're going to do?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. In the modernization review, that will look at all aspects of the fire service. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. What's that? Yeah.
Sorry, and through you, Mr. Mayor, and that's a great highlight. I just wanted council to be aware. So this is just fairly fresh news anyways, that we did get granted for the modernization review. And to the Deputy Chief's comments, we've had some direction from you previously to look at elements of the fire service. So we've built it into that request. It requires a third-party audit and review of the service and the budget. But we're really looking at a very broad-based review of that service budget entirely. And it's going to happen quite fast and furious. So the timelines for the grant funding, I believe, require a final report by the end of January. It's very early in the new year. So we are just doing our due diligence now to get a third party selected. And we'll be actively, right from October, probably till New Year's Day almost, poring over this opportunity, and I think it will respond to a lot of questions and directions that Council has put forth to the service. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please, to receive the Fire Service 2022 budget overview? Councillor Yeo and Dunn, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much for coming today. Thanks, Val, for providing backup, and we'll look forward to hearing from you further, so thank you. So let's take a quick 6-minute stretch. We'll come back at 2:30 and we'll hear our last 3 presentations. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. We are moving on to 4.7, which is the Paramedic Services 2022 Budget Overview. I will turn it over to Ron Taylor to make the introductions.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess for some of the veterans, they've been making their own introductions and coming forward. And although having said that, I'm not sure that Chief Mello is really a rookie anymore, but we're sort of in almost our full year now is under our belt for our shared service chief services through Chief Mello. And we've been thrilled up to this point with how we've been able to sort of manage that resource and work through Randy and his leadership and what he brings to Kawartha Lakes. And with him is both of his deputy chiefs. I'm going to let him introduce them. He'll do a much better job than I will, but certainly for my own self personally, it's great to see both of them. They've certainly been absolute invaluable leaders in the background, keeping the service moving forward. And so I just want to commend both of them while they're tuned in. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Mello to overview the paramedic service budgets. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, and Mr. Mayor, through you, thank you for the opportunity to address council. This is, in fact, the first time I've been in the chambers, so I am, in fact, three-dimensional. I'm not the flat screen you generally, well, I'm a little more than three-dimensional since COVID, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's also a pleasure, besides the pleasure of representing your paramedic service, it's a pleasure to introduce the two deputy chiefs that are on the line with us today. Deputy Chief Sarah Johnson, who's been with Kawartha Lakes Paramedic Service a number of years, and is responsible for our Professional Standards Division, and Deputy Chief Patricia Bromfield, who came to us about 18 months ago, I guess it was, and she takes care of our Operations Division and does a fantastic job. So two great staff members that you've allowed me to work with. So they'll be here to answer the tough questions in each of their areas, I suppose. So again, thanks for this opportunity. I'll start off talking, as everyone has, about the organizational chart. Your paramedic service is broken down into these four basic areas of operations. I won't necessarily call them divisions, but areas of operations. Of course, we have an administration division with an executive assistant, an admin assistant, and they take on the traditional roles of administration with the inclusion of scheduling of our paramedics, some document management for us, the department's responsibilities around the financial reporting, invoicing, records management, et cetera. In the operations division, as I mentioned, it's headed by Deputy Chief Bromfield, and that department basically is in charge of all the deployment of our resources, the staffing of the ambulances, making sure that they're staffed and available, and that she adjusts deployment strategies to meet the needs of the community on your behalf. She also is responsible for oversight of the logistics division we'll talk about in a minute. On the professional standards piece, that is, again, the responsibility of Deputy Chief Johnston. And professional standards really is our quality assurance through the clinical oversight to ensure that we're meeting all of the standards that we are mandated to operate under through the Ambulance Act and the legislation that's associated with it. She has in her department an additional FTE who oversees our staff development and a wellness program. So that's something that, and I'll mention it later in the presentation, that we continue to work on. In logistics, we have an FTE and some part-time hours that supports an individual there who is responsible for our fleet of ambulances, our procurement of equipment and resources. It's a big job. We have about 20 vehicles and around 750,000 kilometers a year going on them. So it's a large job for the logistics division. If you were to maybe envision below operations and professional standards, if we sort of put those into brackets, below that we have 4 full-time shift superintendents. Much like you'd see traditional sergeants in the police force or captains on the fire department, they are out on the road 24/7 providing support and guidance leadership to our paramedics, 1 per shift each day of the year. And then reporting under those are our paramedics, and currently there are about 44 full-time, a number of part-time, and our community paramedics. So as council's aware, and likely the public is as well, It's your responsibility under the Ambulance Act as a municipality to operate an ambulance service. You're the designated delivery agent. And this is what we do on your behalf to make sure that we're doing that within all of the mandated requirements. Again, we're running 44 full-time paramedics. We have 7 ambulances at max on the road, 5 at night out of 6 stations. And we run about 23,000 vehicle movements a year. Roughly 13,000 of those are urgent or life-threatening calls. That requires a lot of oversight, and these are the things that we do to make sure we're continuing to do that effectively. Just out of interest, that's an emergency or life-threatening around every 42 minutes in the city of Kawartha Lakes. So again, we manage the deployment, the personnel, we have to buy the equipment that goes into them, the vehicles themselves. We ensure that the ambulances and the stations meet the standards. We're regulated in every component, I guess, what we do. We work with human resources and corporate services in terms of labor relations and recruitment. Again, as I said, providing on-scene supervision and support to the medics. We also, through Sarah's department, deliver educational programs, and those are basically guided by the next couple of points. We have to do ongoing clinical performance reviews on the care that we give to make sure that we are meeting or exceeding standards, and that those things drive our education and development programs. We also do investigations into patient care issues or service complaints as required, and most of those are reported to the Ministry of Health. And as you're aware, and we're really thankful for the past support, we oversee community paramedicine programs. All this done, as I've mentioned many times, to meet the Ministry of Health standards and regulations. We've just recently gone through our triannual, every 3 years we go through a service review, which is about a 250-point inspection, if I could call that, of our service, much like an accreditation process. And very pleased to say that we came through that very successfully, even in the middle of a pandemic. There were a couple of recommendations or observations, and most of those we've already met with technology change that we're implementing, and I'll mention in a few slides. In terms of the pandemic experience, there are a lot of opportunities. I think there are a lot of lessons learned that are going to help us to be a good service going forward. There were also a lot of challenges. This was an 18-month so far deployment on the front lines for our staff. When you think about even the military brings their folks home every 6 months and gives them relief, that hasn't happened for frontline workers, whether they're paramedics or those in the hospital or anywhere. And they continue to do a fantastic job. And it's taking its toll. There's no doubt about it. There's a level of fatigue and burnout, and we've had some staffing challenges, but they're getting through it well. But on the other side, the pandemic has led us to a number of things that have been positive experiences for us and opportunities for the future. I think first would be the relationships and the partnerships we've developed through the pandemic. I think there's always been a strong relationship with RMH and with HKPR Public Health, but this has really solidified that. We've done a lot of work with them that really, as I've said often, it's left an indelible mark in healthcare in terms of what paramedics can do, and probably nowhere as it is apparent as it is in Kawartha Lakes. We've partnered on vaccination programs, on testing in homes where people couldn't get out to get their tests, and a number of other areas, all coming with full funding. Those were programs that didn't hit the tax levy, well, didn't hit the municipal tax levy, but provincially funded. I think we've developed a lot of policies, deployment strategies, and practices that have maintained staff safety and community safety that we'll be able to carry on into the future. Some of those are examples like the Infection Protection and Control, or IPAC, procedures that we've implemented that will be here probably forever, and those lead to better, I think, better results when we look in the future at lost time due to illness and things like that. We've implemented, with your support and with some federal or provincial funding, better personal protective equipment that'll keep us well suited to meet any future similar pandemic. Lessons in terms of stockpiling and those types of things. And there were a number of other things that we were able to actually get involved with as the Kawartha Lakes and other paramedic services in this region, but specifically Kawartha Lakes around regional partnerships. We formed part of a strike team that went into areas that needed additional testing because of hotspots, and it was funded. We did that fully funded. We were involved in moving patients out of the GTA where hospitals were overwhelmed and had to be decanted to areas such as Kingston or Belleville. We provided resources, again, fully funded to do that. So I think there are a number of lessons in terms of modernization for the paramedic services that'll come out of the pandemic, ways that we can work together regionally. So again, 2021, I've mentioned earlier, and I can say it again, how incredibly busy the year has been. 2020, we saw a drastic decrease in call volume, and I think that was associated with distrust of the healthcare system and fear of the pandemic. But 2021 is the opposite. The month of July was the busiest month we've had on record for Kawartha Lakes Paramedic Service. We ran about 40 calls a day, or an emergency or life-threatening run every 35 minutes, and it's settled through August. We're hoping that trend of settling continues, but overall it's been extremely busy. And of course that comes with increased costs, and I'll discuss that in a minute. We've had a good year though in terms of our planning. You're all aware that we completed the Paramedic Service Master Plan, and we think that that's a good document that will help guide this council and the decision making going forward in terms of meeting your commitments under our response time planning and legislation for the future. We've expanded the community paramedic program and received funding assurance through until the end of the fiscal year, so into 2022. We've added programming, again, fully supported and funded, such as remote patient monitoring, so putting monitoring devices in people's homes. So there's been a great expansion of that. Implemented a number of technology improvements that was supported last year through special projects. Operative IQ, MDocs, and CADLink, those are important data collection and transferal technologies, many of which actually solved many of the recommendations, the few recommendations that we had in our service review. We've also been involved in the launch of a Palliative Care by Paramedic initiative, and we're quite proud of Sarah Johnson on this file. She took a lead in developing this pilot project. There are 5 municipalities in this region that have joined, and we'll be implementing a program that will help us to provide an alternate to transport of palliative care patients when they need supports at home. You'll recall in the master plan that was one of our focuses for the future, was to look at diversion of ambulance calls, and this is a great project heading towards that. And of course, bringing on more paramedics throughout the years, we generally do, and to help assist with some of our staffing issues we had. In general, 2021, despite the challenges, and I mentioned some of the costs associated, we are on track to be on budget. I think we're going to be in pretty good shape, and that's mainly due to the support we're receiving for COVID expenses from the province. So we will be in pretty good shape. There are a couple of areas that are a little bit higher, a few areas where we found savings or been forced to do some savings, like bringing paramedics together for training during the pandemic. But overall, we're on track to be in pretty good condition as far as the budget goes. So in 2022, a number of things that I think we will have on our work plan for the coming year. Certainly COVID recovery, replacing and replenishing our stock for things like future pandemics, understanding what new and changing directions and guidelines are going to look like. Certainly it's been a world of, well, everyone's witnessed it, but certainly in the paramedic industry, a world of changing policies and directives almost daily. So it's settling back to a new norm. We are going to, again, as I referred to earlier, work on reviewing and renewing the staff development and wellness position that we added last year. So again, taking the clinical performance measures and using those to develop our staff, and also focusing keenly on the wellness of our frontline paramedics. That's mental health wellness, physical wellness, and trying to come out of the pandemic in a stronger situation. We have all indications we'll continue to be successful in being supported for our community paramedic programs, mainly through the LIN. And that's we now have 2 FTEs in place in a program called High Intensity Supports at Home. We're also, as I think most of council is aware, still advocating for funding for a long-term care community paramedic program. And we had a meeting at AMO with the minister's staff, or the ADM, about that. There is indication that we should be, I think if I was to try to quote them, cautiously optimistic we'll be hearing soon about further funding and support for that. So we hope that that comes through for us. We've demonstrated that this community has an aging population and long-term care needs, and we can play a role in providing what I call virtual long-term care space to get people out of the hospital earlier, provide safe supports for them while they're waiting for placement. Of course, the master plan that Council's aware of, we're moving into the first phase of that, and our priority right now is around Lindsay Station, the design, and looking at site selection, and that's worked into the 2022 budget. The last thing that I'd mention in my work plan for next year will be to further develop and monitor other key performance indicators. Currently, we report as mandated by the province only on response times. And it's, if I was to be blunt, it's at times a meaningful measure, not a meaningful measure, an ineffective measure. It simply looks at response times to certain acuity of calls by your entire general geography. So as we know, there you have concentrations of higher population, you have urban and rural areas, and it's an ineffective measure of our performance to blanket the entire region with one target. So we're looking at moving forward with more operational key performance indicators, perhaps reporting on urban versus rural response times, also adding a number of other measures that I think are meaningful to cost of the vehicle operation, things that will help to inform asset management planning and the like, and good budgeting going forward. We're also, there's a project in Eastern Ontario that Sarah again is involved with, as well as a number of other professional standards deputies, developing more clinical key performance indicators. Simply measuring our performance by stopping a clock is not meaningful. We need to know how we're affecting the clinical care of the patients that we serve on your behalf. So we're looking at implementing a suite of KPIs for the coming year. So in general, this budget for 2022, with some ambition, is still pretty much a status quo budget. We're hoping to keep things basically where they are. We've found some areas where the budget has to be increased due to the call volume increases. We found other areas to try to find efficiencies. Overall, it's pretty much a status quo budget. I think it's a budget that sets us up to be successful in meeting your obligation to the community in terms of the paramedic service in a fiscally responsible manner. And I'm looking forward to moving forward in 2022 with that budget. So with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes the presentation to this point.
Thanks, Chief. We'll see if there's any questions. Obviously, thanks to you and your two deputy chiefs. I won't bore you by saying we appreciate what you do and appreciate how much you keep our community safe. So I know it's been a tough go for a lot of people over the last little while, and certainly no more so than our paramedics. So we might not always say it, but you know that we appreciate it. So please pass that along.
Thank you.
One thing I want to ask is just, can you give us a quick update on the dispatch review? I know the CAC, there was some pilot projects in place, and when you talk about response times and not just measuring how that kind of ties in, it's not just to get there, but should we be getting there? And just maybe just give us a quick overview on that, if you know where that's at.
Sure, thank you. That is a fantastic question, and it's a really important question in terms of us moving forward with a modern and efficient service, just for the reasons that you said. The province has dedicated and committed to updating the dispatch centers with the new CAD, computer-aided dispatch system. They've said at this point in time that everything has been basically on hold for a year and a half because it takes so much time to go through the number. I think there's something like 13 dispatch centers across the province to go in to actually do the programming, do the training to implement it. It's on its way. We're preparing for it ahead of time with the CAD-Link project that you heard about, which will set up that bi-directional feed of information between the paramedics and the dispatch center. So we're preparing, we're ready for it to go, but we're at the mercy of the province with their planning that they are stating is delayed because of the pandemic.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what it is that they're reviewing? I know through Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, I'm kind of familiar. I'm not sure all of council's familiar with, a response call and lights and sirens and so many percentage of calls they automatically dispatch because they're not getting enough information. So better to be safe than sorry when they could get more information. And can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you to the members of council. I think if I was to try to summarize that briefly, I would compare the questions that the two systems ask. The system we have right now would ask maybe a dozen questions. Is the patient conscious? Does the patient have chest pain? Are they short of breath? And as soon as they hear a key word like short of breath, they'll dispatch the ambulance lights and sirens, no further questions asked. The new system would go much deeper into that questioning. So if they got to shortness of breath, they would ask what to us is a pretty simple question, like how long have you had it? And if the answer is since I was 68 and I'm now 88, then we would talk about, you know, how bad is it today? Can we get you some other resources? They might be able through that questioning either hold an ambulance back until it's appropriate to send them, depending on the rest of the situation around, if ambulances are available. There may be opportunities in the future to say, we can send a community paramedic over to see how you're doing. Maybe we can set up a virtual visit with the doctor. So those things aren't necessarily ready yet, but this type of dispatch system allows us to go to that next step. And again, that was an important piece of our master plan, was to talk about those diversion strategies. Where can we actually provide or bring assistance to the patient rather than bringing the patient to assistance each time? Right now we have no choice but run lights and sirens, find out the person's been short of breath a long time. We have no alternative but to take them to emerge, where they probably are going to be set up sometimes with, you know, a visit to the clinic later. So this system will allow us to divert some of those calls, better use the resources, and probably either bring better care to the patient in their home or provide them with alternative on-ramps or pathways into healthcare other than they emerge. So it's the sky's the limit once it's in place, but it's the simple process of getting this dispatch update in, getting it rolling, and then we can examine those other opportunities in the future. So that's why it's been so important to, I think, the UWC and many, many others to have this dispatch repaired.
Perfect, thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a question?
Yeah, he started a program, probably 3 or 4 years ago now, because this pandemic thing got in our way, where we literally followed patients released from the hospital home, made sure they got settled in, and did regular follow-up until how's that program going?
So I think maybe I'll watch for Sarah to wave me down if I head in the wrong direction with this answer, but I think that program has morphed somewhat into this new high-intensity supports or high-intensity needs support program. That original program was more locally focused to help RMH with their needs to get folks discharged earlier with those additional supports. We actually have probably morphed that into the current program, which really does the same, but it also continues to keep individuals safely at home rather than re-enter it. So we've built on that and expanded on it. I'd say that groundwork has led to, you know, some of the success in the current program.
Oh, we were hoping, and council didn't have any objections to funding it, but we were hoping that funding would flow from the Ross, from the province as a particular program. Did any funding ever flow, or are we still carrying the ball?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm really glad he asked that question, because somewhere in my paper I wrote in big letters advocacy, and I missed it while I was going through. We need continued advocacy for base funding for these programs. It's critically important, but unfortunately we run at the annual budget cycles of the LHIN. We often don't know about our funding until our currently funded program has ended, so we're forced to stretch to see how long we can continue to go. It's a fragile system that's really critically important to our community, and the only way to really effectively move this forward is to get base funding for it. We don't have it yet. We're at the annual budget, the whim of the annual budget cycles of the LHIN, so we need advocacy continued for base funding for community paramedicine.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, deputies.
So that's a community paramedicine program, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's what, I don't know if Sarah looked like she was ready to say something, so I don't know if she's got anything to add, but I don't know if you want to refer to her for a minute, but
Absolutely.
I think we should make her do some work today, so let's get her on here.
I didn't think I'd be put on the hot seat, but through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, it is a good question and something that is at the top of the work list these days. But community paramedicine has evolved and morphed into the high intensity support at home program that Randy was speaking to and the chief was speaking to. what has ended up happening is we're still supporting those high-risk discharge patients from the hospital, and it has also evolved to also capture patients from the family health care team, other patients from the community, and different referral sources. So where we started with one paramedic 5 days a week and 8 hours a day, we now have 2 full-time paramedics working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's great for the community, it's great for patients. We're now supporting about 125 patients in their home on a regular basis, keeping them out of the emergency room where they were frequently there weekly or sometimes even a few times a week. So it's a great, wonderful program. So it's great to see it continue.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other questions for the chief or the deputy chiefs? Seeing none, I need a motion to receive the Paramedic Service 2022 budget overview, please. Councillor Dunn or Councillor Helmsley, that's it. And Councillor O'Reilly, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we'll move into Human Services 2022 budget overview, item 4.8. Rod Sutherland's going to join us. Take your time, Rod, whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. Get myself together here. Here, start. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to talk about the Human Services Department and their plans for 2022 and our 2021 review. It's good to be out and seeing people in person. I'd like to start just to highlight on
Do you want to introduce some of the staff, Rod? I think there's some new faces up here. Maybe we haven't.
Going the wrong way. There we go. I was just going to do it with the organizational chart. So the department is Human Services, and I'll just cover the 4 main divisions or program areas, and as I go, introduce on the screen that you're here. So the first, this is from a depiction of I'll talk a little bit about the integration as we go into the other slides. As a traditional organizational chart is how we're still organized and the positions are done. From an integration standpoint and where the service delivery is going, it's not really consistent with this type of organizational chart anymore, as services are very much integrated, coordinated between the divisions, planned in more coordination and delivered as well. So as I said, this is the traditional approach for now. So in housing services, which includes the service manager role for housing, and homelessness services is under Michelle Corley, manager, who's on the screen. Michelle just joined as the manager position earlier this year. For social services, which is the primarily social assistance, as well as children's services, is Janine Mitchell, manager. For both the our service manager role for housing and social services, we are the provincially designated service manager, as you know, so we also deliver services for the County of Haliburton for all of those programs and include our Haliburton office as well. Victoria Manor is the city's long-term care home. Pam Koulis, I don't believe is on the line right now, is the executive director there. And last but not least, Clorth Lakes Haliburton, or KLH Housing Corporation, Housing Corp, is the city's Housing Development Corporation, which the city is the sole shareholder, and again, it delivers for Haliburton County as well, with councillors Dunn and Elmsley sitting on the board. It is an independent corporation under the Business Corporations Act and has its separate CEO, and our new CEO is Kirsten Maxwell, who's on the screen. For some of you, maybe the first introduction to Kirsten. She joined us at the beginning of July. And Kirsten will be back, as I talk about it with the KLH, back at council to present with the agencies and boards at the end of October. So you'll have a bit more introduction to her then, and she'll have an opportunity to share her story. So moving to the overview, just again from the division standpoint, between the Housing and Social Services divisions, 74 full-time staff, Victoria Manor, 140. That is a little bit fluid at times, I'll talk about. As a department, we also support healthcare agencies, health agencies, such as the Kawartha Lakes Healthcare Initiative. The funding through that is administered through Human Services, funding through to the health unit, as well as the 2 nurse practitioners. KLH Housing Corp I referenced, as well as the overall department budget, just referencing, is about a $58 million gross expenses, of which, because of our provincial roles, about $45 million is provincially subsidized, so we have a very large revenue stream offsetting those costs. So looking at the pandemic opportunities, as a department that's primarily direct service delivery, we're not specific initiatives and projects, it's ongoing service delivery. The challenges of the pandemic, I'll get to in a little bit, but the opportunities relate to a lot of the changes going on provincially in human services, overall integration and modernization, as well as with the social assistance, what the province is calling renewal or recovery and renewal. The modernization and the recovery and the renewal go with the new vision. That initiative has been going on for a few years now. As I mentioned with the org chart, there's an integration, human services integration shift where programs are planned together in coordination, shifting towards delivery more coordinated, towards common outcomes. So from the human services standpoint, the impact, we're dealing with the same people to a large degree, the residents that require our services and that we serve. And so looking at approaches to better align those services. The limitations, I guess, of the pandemic prompted a lot of those modernization things that were under review, going to like digital footprints. Just I believe it was last week was announced around the provincial approach to digital services. From a direct service delivery standpoint, how we deliver social assistance, the specific Ontario Works components, housing services, homelessness services, has largely gone remote or indirect the last year or last year and a half. The province has begun shifting the financial components, which are the more formula-driven decisions around eligibility for financial basic assistance, to provincially managed. That is shifting. They created what's called an IBAU, I've got the acronym right now, intake benefit, that's not it, a centralized intake unit, we'll call it that, through the province, where people apply through a provincial call center for the initial contact around social assistance. It's not without its challenges so far. It's been a rocky road so far, but it is a start, and it is sort of building on those opportunities from the pandemic. The longer-term vision for social assistance comes into, and I'll speak to a little bit more afterwards around the 2022 impacts as well. As part of the modernization and aligning to with the renewal and recovery and renewal is the employment services transformation. As you know, as part of the Muskoka-Kawartha's economic region, we're one of those 3 prototypes in the province for employment services. That was implemented in January of this past year. That links back to, and I believe the Treasurer referenced it this morning, a change in the funding under the Ontario Works Administration of a reduction of, I believe her slide says $1 million, it was a little over 800,000, but that was that reduction in funding there as that service shifted to the new employment service system manager for the region. In long-term care, this will be a trend across both the 2021 highlights and 22 around long-term care impacts, reviews, and operational challenges. What the province has announced as a result of the pandemic, as you're aware of, there's been a number of provincial reviews, ombudsman review, long-term care commission that are looking at the full range of pretty much the full range of services and funding associated with long-term care. Staffing levels, just talking the 4-hour minimum hours of care. The overall approach for who's being, what funding, who's being funded, the temporary $3 pandemic pay that was permitted or allocated for personal support workers that we received several different allocations for and was continually extended and has been announced as a permanent measure as well going forward. We just don't know the details of how that funding will roll into the broader review. Pandemic pay or pandemic funding overall, long-term care is a good example of that. How throughout 2021 received, or by year end, we'll be receiving just under $2 million in provincial funding specific to the pandemic to support various initiatives. The challenge, and I jump into the 2022 budget because it's a little bit, it all connects, is the uncertainty around that. And as you recall, last year, probably in the same presentation for the 2021 budget, we talked about the unknowns about where would funding go. We budgeted for expenses that we needed to maintain service and care levels and funding or staffing. While the funding for that was unknown. So with the pandemic pay we have received, we're in a good position for the current year. Unfortunately, we still don't have confirmation of what that will be continuing into 2022 and beyond. So I'll be talking about that a couple times throughout. Just on the opportunities overall from the pandemic is some of the innovations, and partially around modernization, part of the realignment of services and how we operate all the services, and this is across the city. I heard Chief Mello mention it as well, is some of the new partnerships and enhancements that came out of that. There have been some great connections made across sectors, new relationships established, and new connections that will be able to remain and will have sustainable benefits going forward for the people we serve. So, on the 2021, again, not to highlight Victoria Manor, but it's the overall impact on long-term care, and again, I said this last year as we were talking about the same issues, can't be understated. It's been in the news nonstop, the impact in long-term care homes on residents, on staff. Those impacts can't be understated. I've heard some of the stories firsthand, and it's quite harrowing in terms of the impacts. We were as a home for Victoria Manor, we did not have any outbreaks throughout the pandemic. We had no resident cases, positive cases of COVID. There were a couple staff, but not impacting in terms of operations directly and not resulting in outbreaks. But the continuing vigilance, I guess, in terms of making sure that operations continue in a safe way, as the safest possible way for residents and staff, it should be paramount and is a paramount feed into the 2022 budget. I will say, just because we have a committee management meeting next Monday, just looking at the 3 members from there, where that budget will be presented, so we'll be able to talk in a little bit more detail. It's just being finalized actually today and tomorrow, just finalizing those things. So we will be having more conversations about that in terms of the impacts. Housing, and just reference around the housing access and affordability, again, a large focus in media, and I'm sure everybody has heard around just access to housing stock availability across the full range of housing, the demand, the sales of private market, from single-family homes, cottages, across the full spectrum, down to people buying for future investment opportunities. What would have been more affordable at one point is becoming less and less affordable over time. It's putting further pressures on the need for affordable housing. I'll talk a little bit more about the 2022 with the housing targets as well. Just referencing, I think it was in the recent report, actually that was at the advisory committee, that the wait list for the financially assisted housing that the city manages by the second quarter of this year to increased to over 2,300 people on that right now, which is about a 400% increase over the last 10 years to that wait list. In the second quarter, just to show the need, in the second quarter of this year, there were 12 households that were housed from the wait list. while 233 applications came in the same period. So one housed for every 19 that apply in the second quarter. Just around some of the service delivery challenges, one of the things I want to point out, and I can't sort of cover off everything, and there's been a lot of challenges throughout. One to highlight, emergency childcare, you probably heard about throughout the pandemic, was one of those things that they're great when they come along, an announcement in terms of how something will be supporting the community, but the administration and the process to get some of these things in place were quite challenging. During the pandemic, everybody's dealing with reduced services, reduced access. Our staff themselves are dealing with that in their own lives as well, and while they're trying to coordinate these services. Just referencing that there were over 250 children were served by emergency childcare program last year, 12 licensed childcare sites and one licensed home-based site throughout the pandemic. Just as an example of some of the challenges. The Quarth Lakes Halliburton, or KLH Housing Corp, just to highlight earlier this year with the hiring of Kirsten Maxwell as CEO and Michelle as the housing manager. As you recall, there was the restructuring through the corporate structure of KLH, or the oversight structure, with the splitting of that position that Hope Lee held before her retirement into the separate CEO and manager positions. And there are a number of other pieces within the structure of KLH that were part of those recommendations that are in the process of being implemented throughout the year, including in terms of increasing the representation of tenants on the board, which is underway right now for recruitment. 2022, just to highlight yet again, Victoria Manor. Like I mentioned, when we looked at last year's presentation and the unknowns about long-term care, as I said earlier, can't understate the impacts and the pressures there. But just to reiterate it, that is continuing pressures. The additional measures that were put in place this year, which are significant, to continue to support a safe home for residents and safe work environment for staff. We need to maintain, in our opinion, and those staffing levels and positions will be part of the 2022 budget, but we still do not have that confirmation of ongoing provincial funding. The announcement, like I mentioned, about the enhanced $3 an hour for PSW pay was announced. I believe it was announced in a political announcement or a news conference, but we've received no confirmation of how that will be implemented. But there's a number of other announcements that are pending or we're expecting, such as supporting continued infection prevention and control measures and things like that. So those, I think, are critical to maintain the services that are in place and the supports to residents and staff, but it does create pressures for 2022, and like I said, it'll be part of the discussion at the budget. Again, just from the standpoint there, I'm referencing about as we're moving into closer to recovery, overall with fourth wave and other impacts of the pandemic are still being managed there. Reviews of things like vaccination policies and things that are still going on. So there's still continuing work and continuing pressures there that will likely be on for some time. I will note, as I mentioned with the budget, with the 2021 budget, we had at that time we talked about this year having that pretty significant increase pending the provincial funding. So with the funding we did get this year, we will be in a surplus position for 2021, and that'll form, again, part of that budget information when it comes forward about the details of that. But again, it's only middle of September, but we have a pretty good indication of where we'll end up at year end for this year. So for 2022, the implementation of the new social assistance vision, which I mentioned earlier, is into 2022. That goes beyond just the employment services transformation that I referenced. The overall provincial vision is about totally shifting, for the most part, all of the direct financial supports piece of social assistance, the monthly benefits, determination of eligibility, monitoring and compliance, from municipalities to the province to directly deliver, and the municipalities assuming full responsibility and increased responsibility under what they're calling the life stabilization approach. So the case management, the supports to people would be expanded beyond the traditional just strict social assistance to a broader life stabilization, other supports such as maintaining housing, supporting, accessing other services, mental health, addictions, primary health, things like that. So that is coming. It's in process now of being developed by the province. There's an extensive consultation process they've got underway with public, but primarily with social assistance staff on one side, as well as social assistance clients on the other, to get input to those processes. And just to highlight from a budget standpoint, and I believe the treasurer mentioned it this morning as well, in children's services, there was a shift to how administration is funded, where the administration is to be funded a strict 50-50 cost share. Previously, there was a minimum dollar amount that municipalities had to maintain, where over several years of additional funding, it reduced the percentage-wise that municipalities contributed, but just at a set dollar amount. That was to shift in 2021, but the province came out with transitional funding for 2021 to offset that increase. That is, they've announced definitely won't continue for 2022, so there's a pressure there for actually the net impact is about $120,000 in the 22 budget. And lastly, for the, I skipped over the second point, around the housing targets. When I referenced around the pressures in the housing overall is our continuing focus and refocus for 2022 around achieving council's affordable housing targets. There's been a lot of, again, media and focus on that, and we would like to continue to look at ways to enhance that. I know there has been some interest in a presentation last week with a private developer who referenced it and has been in touch with staff about incorporating some of the incentives and supports towards those, including affordable housing in their project. So we are definitely focusing on those targets. Just referencing some of the developments, and from KLH standpoint, they have a number of developments under various stages. One, Hamilton's Park here in Lindsay, in Fenland, in Haliburton County, and Minden as well. There's several in progress, and our focus will very much be working with KLH around using the centralized wait list, that wait list of 2,300 that I mentioned, people looking for affordable housing, to draw, house people from that wait list to those units. So again, focusing on those people that are requiring the housing with the targets and specific efforts in 2022, we hope we can make some progress there. And with that, I think that's it. Oh, that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. You and your staff, well done. Questions? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just under the item of affordable housing, that definition for me is a sort of a moving target. It can mean anything from the average person in town can't afford to buy a $600,000 home, we need to build more $300,000 homes, or to what I refer to as affordable housing, 70% of the current market value. What are we talking about here in your presentation?
Reference in terms of the need is across the full range in terms of stock. Ours, in terms of our focus and with the targets, is primarily on that affordable as defined, like the ministry definitions, in terms of market rent or percentage above or below market rent, as opposed to from a private purchase market for a home. Affordability for people, like small-A affordable, will vary, but from a target standpoint, specifically to the ministry definitions.
So a couple things, Rod. You say 2021 highlights Victoria Manor operations. Kind of, you did, I mean, they did such a good, not just 2021, but they really did a good job through this pandemic. You know, I don't know if, I don't want to call your report underwhelming in what they did, but, you know, and I don't just mean Victoria Manor, but, you know, some of our housing facilities as well, right across the board. But I think Victoria Manor and what went on there kind of stood out as, you know, we put protocols in place, we hit the right targets, you know, people did a good job, and as a result of that, you know, as you mentioned before, we didn't have any outbreaks, we didn't have any patients, which not a lot of homes across the province can say, obviously that. So I just wonder if you want to comment on that. I'm not criticizing you for underwhelming it, but it just seems like it's more than just a highlight. It's something that we can build on, and moving forward, I think everybody should be congratulated over there.
Thank you. I definitely agree. How much time do we have? And I don't mean to understate it in any way. And I truly can't appreciate what they went through, the people actually in the home, because this is, I've heard some at firsthand, secondhand, but I can tell you in terms of the examples of some of the things I've heard in terms of staff, the impact on their own mental health, well-being, trying to manage during absences, like trying to get staff, I think, and hiring staff in the home is the biggest challenge and has been. Recruitment strategies, actually meeting with the CAO tomorrow about some of these specifics, and then we'll be having a discussion next week too, is huge. And you've probably heard it referenced in the media around staffing levels, short-staffed, the impacts on the staff left trying to manage. There isn't the number of people coming in, and this is across all homes, all healthcare sector. The demand for healthcare workers in long-term care is massive. There are staff leaving, but they're all staying within the system. So one of the things talked about is the use of incentives for hiring incentives. That just takes people from another sector. I mean, from a selfish standpoint, it might help us, but what we'll do elsewhere? We've lost staff to that. Staff have been leaving to go to other areas because of incentives. I'm not saying to blame them at all. I mean, it's a part of the system. Getting people to come into the sector is really the challenge. How do we get people into the sector? The province has talked about some specific measures that might help with that in terms of training, the cost of education and training around some of those things. That might be a piece of it. The actual core wage has got a huge amount of attention. What people in that type of work get paid as a base pay has been an issue. These are all the types of things that impact that. But I can tell you the ability, if we had the ability to have the actual number of staff we need in the home at all times to keep it running, would go a long way just to alleviating so much pressure on existing staff, leaves and absences.
No, that's good. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I just, you know, we talk about it at the EOWC all the time. You know, we get the presentations. We've heard it, you know, we're going to fix long-term care. Well, that's an easy comment to make, right? But, you know, when we talk about, you know, funding and the cost and the 4 hours of care and just what you're saying, the challenges, it's not just hiring 10 more people. It's where are you going to get 10 more people that want to do this, right? The whole thing needs to be lifted up to some point. And, you know, sometimes as a municipality, we focus on our Victoria Manor, and so we should, but that's a pretty small percentage in the city of Kawartha Lakes of people in long-term care homes. And, you know, we should have a concern about every home and that every senior and every resident who's in a long-term care home. And, you know, it's more than just a quick fix and a few things we need to do. But certainly kudos to Victoria Manor for setting the bar, I guess, if nothing else. And I'm sure it wasn't a bar that was done easily. So please pass on our appreciation. One other quick question is just on your Human Services, Child Care Administration, the funding reduction, I guess that was pushed 160. You said 120, but on our presentation earlier was 160. Doesn't matter. So it's administration. So what does that mean? This is not like, what does that mean if? And I'm not saying we won't, but if Kawartha Lakes chooses to not fund that or make up that difference, does that mean less childcare spaces, or is it administration to implement those programs?
That administration line is the city's administration of the system. So it's directly supporting our administration, the staff that administer the programs, the fee subsidy, administer fee subsidy, take fee subsidy applications, case manage those, manage the overall programs, the contracts, the service agreements with all the agencies. It's not the direct administration of the agencies themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, you had a question.
Thank you. I didn't see in the highlights, but maybe, Mr. Mayor, you would speak to it as well, because you talked to the Deputy Minister that one of the highlights may be that we may not have to replace Victoria Manor in the near future. There may be an extension. I thought that might be a highlight.
Well, I was waiting until we got it in writing, but maybe the director wants to touch on it. I know one of our long-term financial plan highlights or bumps in our financial plan was certainly the pressure of a new manor, and we were told by 2025, and at our AMO presentation to the parliamentary assistant, we were told because we're a municipal home, which has had upgrades, that we don't have to meet that 2025 regulation. So that certainly changes the pressures in some of our long-term financial plan, but we're waiting to get that confirmation in writing, which we're told is confirmed, but we want to make sure before we start changing our financial plan that it's good. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, correct. So I would look for it in writing just to be confirmed, because we have previous emails over the years. It's a fairly large program, but we've had emails over the years referencing municipalities were required to follow up. But there seems to have been a few changes the last few years. So once we have that in writing, we're looking at changes to the plan, and then a longer term plan to get to, like the building probably has another 10 to 15 year lifespan, and looking at a better plan to ahead of time for a replacement to give more time to plan ahead or create reserves or a specific funding approach.
And a lot of that is to do because we already have a generator. We only have 2 in a room, not 4, right? I mean, there's suppression, fire suppression. There's a lot of things that are there that were part of that upgrades that needed to be made.
Correct. There's 2 requirements, somewhat related to the redevelopment, but separate in terms of deadlines, is the fully sprinklered home. Victoria Manor is already, and having a generator on site as well. Some of the other things through the pandemic in terms of air conditioning, things like that have come up, and the Victoria Manor does have air conditioning already.
Well, let me know when you get that in writing, would you? I think I signed the letter requesting it in writing, so maybe I'll hear before you do. I'll let you know. Councillor Ashmore, you had a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, to Director Sutherland. On one of the earlier slides, you had housing. Our housing has 74 full-time employees. Is that for City Kawartha Lakes and Haliburton altogether? And when you centralized in Lindsay here, did it help make things efficient as far as not having to have as many full-time employees or employees in total, or how did that centralization help you in your costs in the last year or so?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so the total 74 is for both the housing and social services divisions. So the full complement outside of Victoria Manor. Actually, the KLH employees are within that. The people that do KLH Housing Corp works are city employees, so they're counted within that number as well. I believe in the consolidation, the only consolidation we had in terms of spaces was the move of the office from 322 Kent to 68 Lindsay, and there was about half a dozen staff at 37 Lindsay Street South that went there as well. So there, from a staffing, the consolidation of those 2 offices wasn't targeting specifically in terms of efficiencies of the staff numbers, so it didn't change. There was no change related to that, and that 74 does include the Haliburton office. There's 6 staff, I believe, in the Haliburton office of those 74.
Councillor Seymour Fagan, go ahead.
Thank you, through you. Hi, Rod. I'm just wondering, earlier in the presentation, we saw $1 million deficit in Ontario Works. I was wondering if you can explain that. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in the Treasurer's reference this morning, that was related to the reduction in funding. So that was actually a little over 800,000, affected the 2021 budget. So that was a reduction of provincial funding, which in essence was a transfer of that funding from us to the new employment services system. So with that reduction of I believe it was 844,000 in subsidy, we reduced our expenses by a corresponding amount. So there's no net difference with that, but it was because it was 100% subsidized or subsidy.
Okay, thank you. And what do you foresee coming forward for 2022 with that then?
In that line, there's not a significant change. it's relatively status quo.
Status quo with the reduction. Yeah.
From the 2021 budget, it was removed for 2021. So 2022 is, I believe it's like a 1 or 2% right now, or in that neighborhood. It's just, there's no broader impacts because of that.
Thank you. I got no further questions here for you, so I'll ask for a motion to receive the Human Services 2022 budget overview. Councillor Elmsley and Yo. All in favor? That's passed. So thank you for your presentation and for staff for tuning in and keeping Rod on track. We appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, our last presentation, last but not least, we'll take a minute, let Rod go out, and Brian Robinson's coming in to do a presentation on Public Works 2022 budget overview. Hi, Brian, welcome. So we're doing 4.9, your overview, and just put the mic on, and whenever you're ready to go, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, here today to, I guess, wrap up the long day of discussion. Public Works, as normal, wraps up the day. So I'll be as brief as possible. If there's, to try to leave as much time at the end of the presentation for questions. Move forward. Public Works org chart. We have 6 divisions, technically 7 within Public Works. Roads operations, transit operations, waste management operations, fleet services are all part of our tax base operational component, and we also have the water, wastewater user rate service. And then we also have our administration group. So on the line with me, I have, as most of the directors have gone through today, we have most of the thanks, if not all of the thanks, goes out to the amazing team that we have within Public Works. We have almost 190 staff within our group, and led by a group of fantastic managers. Shelley Harrington is our administrative EA, so she's my call her the quarterback of Public Works. That helps coordinate all the activity, handles customer service, budget control, and so on and so forth with our department. So she's on vacation this week, unfortunately unable to be with us. Go through roads operations. Our roads operations group have 3 core managers, Oliver Vigalius, Chris Porter, and David Lemke. I believe at least 2 are online. I don't see Dave Lemke, but Oliver and Chris are there. So again, thanks to that group they have probably the largest portfolio budget-wise to go through from an operational perspective. Transit operations and fleet services, there's 1 manager there, and I think as we learned earlier today through the presentations, Rod Porter moved into that role a couple of months ago, so Rod's actively learning that portfolio and building its capabilities within the city, so we're ecstatic to have Rod on board within Public Works again. Waste management operations is managed through David Kerr. So a couple years ago, David had a portfolio of environmental services that included water, wastewater, and waste. David Kerr is solely the responsibility for waste management moving forward. Has been for a little over a year. And lastly, the department water, wastewater operations, Amber Hayter is the manager of water, wastewater operations. So again, an incredible group of individuals, and I rely on them on a daily basis, and they never fail to come through. So it's fantastic to have that. Our department overview. Again, we provide administrative operational oversight for implementation of roads, solid waste, water, wastewater, fleet transit. So our roads operations, again, we have 2,700 kilometers of roads. We provide winter operations, summer operations. There's many contracts and contractual obligations to delivering that overall service within Public Works. From a fleet perspective, we have overall maintenance and responsibility and leasing, so on, for our non-emergency fleet. We set out all the operational repair management, capital procurement through that group. Within transit, we have, again, specifically Lindsay Transit, we have, obviously responsible for providing reliable and safe transit services to the residents of the City of Kawartha Lakes. It also includes the limo, which is Lindsay Mobility Specialized Transit Services. Within our waste division, again, we have multiple landfills, open and closed, managed through this group, meeting all the regulatory requirements for landfill operations. There's 5 active and 11 closed landfills within that group, and also you'll hear a little bit later on some expanded services looking at diversion efforts and management of those landfills. And again, obviously for water, wastewater, we have 21 active drinking water systems and 6 wastewater systems managed and operated in a combined effort between internal and contracted services, with the Ontario Clean Water Agency being our largest contractor, handling the operation of a number of our facilities. So that's the general overview of the department. Again, we have a significant focus on customer service, program delivery. Obviously, we're a front-facing department in 5 out of those 6 categories, with the exception of fleet. Fleet is kind of a background support division within our group. We heavily focused on process improvement, providing responsible government, fiscal accountability within our department, and strategic implementation. So when we start to look at programs that we'll talk a little bit later on with respect to the ditching program and so on that we're looking to modify within our group. So again, about 185 full-time and part-time employees, and that's head count, so there's actually more numbers than that, but that's really what we have equivalent within our group. And about a $58 million operating budget, combined tax base and user rate. So again, a significant portfolio managed within our group. And there are multi-million dollar contracts administered within our group, being the Aqua contract and winter maintenance and so on and so forth. Our pandemic opportunities. So being a front-facing, service delivery department, we are focused on delivery, and really there was no way of getting around that. We had a very brief, probably 2-week period where we had to respond to the pandemic just like everybody else, where there was shut down and limited services. A couple of the divisions didn't shut down at all. Our roads division kept going right through. They were providing winter control, they were plowing roads. They were continuing to offer those services. We had a limited shutdown of our transit services, and they were back up and running within a matter of weeks on a modified platform. Waste services did not stop, although we did close access to landfills. The waste services component kept moving through. So it's definitely a challenge from our group. All the way through all those things, to the first bullet point, ensuring the safety of our staff and the public is paramount. We made sure that whatever we rolled through, whatever decisions we made, were with the best interest of our staff in mind, making sure that we could maintain that health and safety, and I think that track record speaks for itself. So again, I mentioned that all services were offered, some modified during the lockdown. Development and implementation of multiple divisional SOPs. So when we start talking and looking about training and access and work within the landfill, there's other ones for our fleet and our transit groups specifically as well. So making sure that we have all those processes in place and again standards to make sure our staff are safe. Fleet impacts, one of the things that obviously we used to do is we used to run 3 or 4 people into a truck to go out and do patching or to do other types of activities, if they're going to replace a culvert. We no longer had that ability. We were down to 1 person for a period of time per vehicle, which has a serious impact on our ability to meet services. So they devised, the bio barrier between the front and back seats of our crew cab trucks to allow at least to get 2 people in a truck. It still has ongoing impacts and services to our business, as we're forced to bring in additional equipment to meet operational needs within multiple divisions, Parks and Recreation, Public Works, etc. Still ongoing transit restrictions, so we've installed some barriers there to keep drivers safe and put protocols in place for those groups, but still limiting the number of passengers on our transit system. We have reached out to the local health unit to have some conversation about that, because we're starting to see a resurgence in use of our transit system, and starting to see that pressure within that group where we're starting to reach the operational limitations with the current restrictions in place. So we're continuing to review that that concern and looking for how we're going to manage that process moving forward. There are a number of other municipalities that didn't put any passenger restrictions in place whatsoever. So, those are considerations that we're going to have to make moving forward. But again, ultimately, the goal is to keep our staff and the public safe. We obviously, throughout the course of 2020 and now into 2021, have a significant role within the city's business continuity plan. That's looking at all the operational services and how we can maintain and continue those services moving forward. The Public Works Department, obviously being that front-facing department, like several others, plays a fairly significant role in maintaining that level of service. So definitely a number of hours of again, the senior leadership group that I mentioned before, involved in reviewing and developing that plan and working to bring it to into completion. 2021 highlights. So again, we're going to continue to monitor and recommend service modifications. So we are working in the background right now, looking at the winter sidewalk level service, our winter roads maintenance level service, and sweeping policies. Council's provided some additional direction to take a look at sweeping, where we already had some of our internal recommendations in addition to that. So we're going to continue to bring those recommendations forward to council as needed. Water wastewater operational transition summary report. Again, a successful summary report provided to council, maintaining our licensing and operating requirements for those systems. The water wastewater operational transition, that is that hybrid model for water operation where council directed us to bring back 2 of the plants that were being operated via contract back internally. So that transition actually took place this year, although the decision was made last year. So we're working our way through those transitions, and it's been I'll tell you, it's been a bit of a challenge because we've run into some almost immediate capital concerns with one of the plants that was taken over, but we're working our way through it. Enhanced winter and seasonal level of service. So again, under council direction, we provided some enhanced services for snow removal and winter maintenance, as well as summer maintenance of our downtown cores. So that service was provided, and council will see some more documentation on that as we move into the fall with additional reporting. Our waste group, leaf and yard modifications to the leaf and yard waste processes, construction and demolition, C&D processes were reviewed with council and direction provided, as well as the mattress and recycling. There's also some additional discussion coming forward on bulky plastics. So lots of transition and additional programming being offered within that group to help diversional efforts and maximize the life of our landfills. ORV guidance task force. That's obviously our off-road vehicle task force, so being one of the key representatives from staff, helping support that through the time frame and meet the requirements of council on that as well. And then the last thing that we flagged through our 2021 highlights is the fleet services and standardization review. That was a consultant-driven assessment of our fleet services with some overall recommendations and guidance through that process as well. Looking forward into 2022, again, we have, I'm happy to say that overall our proposed budgets are relatively in line with what we've hoped to see from that. There's nothing significantly out of line from where we're at, where we have seen some significant pressures in the past. We've been able to stabilize a lot of those big pressures by having some long-term contracts in place. Again, looking at the winter maintenance and our material supply and some other big contracts. So that's great news for the municipality, and those are long-term 7 to 10-year contracts that are in place. We're going to continue our enhanced focus on waste diversion programs and education. There's the integrated waste management strategy update recommended some additional focus and efforts related to that. So that is going to be on our 2022 agenda. I mentioned before the roads ditching program, where council's provided direction to staff to put forward a couple of internal ditching crews. So those programs are contained within our operational budget for recommendation for council. Council has provided direction previously to look at expansion or addition of a 4th route within Lindsay for transit services. That timing has been pushed due to COVID and other activities, but we're looking to try to bring that program into effect in Q3 to Q4 of 2022. So there's, again, recommendations on equipment and manpower within the budget related to that. We're going to continue to manage the transition for the water wastewater plants, and obviously continue long-term to balance and ensure we have an appropriate operational model for those systems. Constantly going under operational review, working with our managers, our supervisors, and all of our frontline staff, seeking their input, guidance, and recommendation on how we can continue to better our operations. And lastly, one of the items that's been floating around for several years now and delayed due to COVID is the electronic document records management system, EDRMS implementation. There's still several divisions within Public Works that haven't had the opportunity to implement that, and we're on schedule to start that this fall and then into the first part of 2022. So that's the general overview. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. And I know sometimes you guys and your staff only hear from us when we have complaints, but you got to know that we appreciate everything that you all do right across the board. So thank you. Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Quick comment. These monthly roads meetings are absolutely excellent. I'm saying that from a personal point of view. It gives me a chance to interact with staff and solve and address problems really quickly, and I think they're a bonus. Having said that, one of the first meetings I went to was commenting staff on street sweeping, and they advised me that if they had an extra sweeper, that they could probably even do a better job. Is an extra sweeper in your budget for this year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, we haven't explicitly put an additional sweeper within our budget. One of the reasons and rationale for that is we are going to go through an extensive review as directed by council to take a look at that overall program. It's not as easy as putting additional piece of equipment and getting a better level of service. Sweeping is a bit of a challenge because it's very time sensitive and it's very weather dependent. This year, obviously, there was a significant number of complaints related to sweeping because we had such a very early melt and very, very dry spring. And, you know, our staff are very cognizant that if we can get out there and we do a lot of the sweeping, we bring contracted services in, if we have, you know, a week or even a couple of days of really bad weather, we're going to have to go out and do that exact same service all over again because we've just added all that additional sand and material back on the road, and it's going to drive our operational costs up significantly. So, and again, it's hitting that volume of roads within, you know, the time period we needed. So we don't know whether the best option is to bring in another piece of equipment or to look at securing additional contracted services or where that needs to be. But we're under, you know, taking that whole process of reviewing it, and we'll come back with some recommendations this fall.
Well, thank you. As I said, I got very positive comments this year. The second question I've got is on transit. The traditional transit that we offer is the old footprint of Lindsay, and that was fine for quite a while. But now with the build out, you know, Springdale Gardens, Alcorn, the Beaumont development, I think it's Cornell Street, I'm not sure. Certainly what Craft Homes are doing, those areas are all contiguous to the traditional footprint of Lindsay. I'm submitting a memo asking for transit to be expanded. The transit with the fourth route, does that include any of that stuff, or what's the story on it?
Yeah. And through you, Mr. Mayor, you're welcome to bring that memo forward. However, that is the intention of looking at that program overall. We recognize that there's additional subdivisions, being developed around the edge of Lindsay that are unserviced. Looking at that fourth route will enable us to expand the services to all areas within the city boundary, and also just town boundary, whichever, the town of Lindsay boundary, and trying to take a look at ensuring that we have, keep that level of service of our routes and so on. That's the intention of. So our staff are going to be working through this fall and into next spring to make sure we have an appropriate routing platform, and then obviously go through the consultation process to roll that out.
Because pressure is starting to mount, not only from the climate change, trying to reduce our carbon footprint group of people, but there's, if you go just south of town to the trailer park, Wagstaff's, yeah. Once again, they've asked over the years many times to have transit out there, so I think it's time, and thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Dunn stole some of my thunder. Certainly, I was going to say the roads meetings are very good. I get a lot out of them, and I thank your staff very much, and I thank them for everything they've done over the last year and a half in the pandemic and stepping up and keeping things moving. I think they've done a really great job and really appreciate it. I also was going to ask you about a street sweeper in the budget, but I won't go there, seeing as how you've already answered the question. And I was also going to offer this passenger restriction on public transit that's causing you a problem. I will raise that question at the Health Unit Board meeting on Thursday and see if we can move things along. So I'm happy to do that. But I did want to ask about a couple of other things. We've had a couple of incidents lately of boil water advisories, and I wonder if that's because our water treatment plants are aging, or if there's a problem there, or if it's something outside that's not within our control. I don't know if you want to answer or if Amber can answer.
I can provide an overview through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. All our infrastructure is always aging. These are not in relation to the aging infrastructure. The boil water advisories that happen are, we operate our facilities in accordance with ministry guidelines. They're over with an abundance of caution. When we have an adverse sample, so when we take our general samples, we send them for testing. If we have a sample come back that exceeds limits, we're obligated to work with the health unit. The health unit then makes a determination of whether they want to issue a boil water advisory. So there's any number of reasons why an adverse sample can come forward. It could be the sampling procedure wasn't there, the bottle was previously contaminated, through the lab, something, we don't know. But out of again, abundance of caution, we issue a boil water advisory, go through that process, and then we immediately resample. And we need to get 2 samples back consecutively that are clear before we can remove the boil water advisory. And that's happened in both these cases. So again, it's a months of caution and making sure that we meet the legislative requirements.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And I just wondered where we were with the signs for speed reduction in urban areas.
That program is being led through our engineering department. I don't have the exact details. I know that they were focusing on some of the rural areas and then working their way down into the urban centers, but I don't have a timeline on that.
Thank you. And lastly, and this isn't going to thrill you, I am getting an inordinate amount of calls and emails about reducing speeds on roads and doing things. I have one group that is adamant that they want photo radar on their road, and it's probably never going to happen. But having said that, Brian, I've been spending a fair amount of time in Montreal lately, and they have speed bumps, and they have more snow than we do. And their speed bumps that they have there are much wider, but they're shallower. But they still do the same thing in slowing down the traffic. And they have areas of 30 kilometers an hour, not 40 or 50, but 30 kilometers an hour. And these effectively keep the speed at that rate. And I intend to bring something forward to have us look seriously at whether we can do something along those lines, because I think they, and I've talked to a couple of other councillors who also are getting a lot of calls on speed, and I think, you know, I understand that it not only could be a challenge for snow plowing, although it doesn't seem to be a challenge in Montreal for it. They don't have to do a lot of repairs to the bumps, and their snow plows seem to adapt to it, and it works for them. So I'm going to, at some point, be bringing something forward on speed bumps, and I just wanted you to be aware of that for your future operations. So I think that, you know, trying to reduce speeds everywhere, and then we throw it on the police departments to police it, and they don't have enough resources to do it. And if they add resources, then our costs go up. So I think we have to look at some other options, and that's the one that occurs to me. But I'd be open to hear, you know, other options from people. So I just, that's where I'm going.
Yeah, again, through you, Mr. Mayor, whatever council decides for its road network, you know, our job within Public Works operations is to provide that operational maintenance. So if there's, you know, if there's ultimately a review requested of staff and our engineering department, who's provided, I think, multiple reports and presentations on traffic calming and traffic, you know, speed reduction measures, recommends moving forward that, council wants to go, we'll provide the services as needed. So.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, just working off Councillor Emily's remarks. Quebec seems to be fairly progressive in that manner. A lot of the streets have these bonhommes there, and if you hit them, well, they'll just bend over and keep on going, probably put a couple scratches in your car. And I find in Hull and so on and so forth, they're very effective at slowing you down. Just a food for thought.
So can you say that again? What did they use to? Yeah. Oh. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's end it on that. Bonhomme. Any other questions for Public Works? Councillor Ashmore?
Yeah, just a quick question through you to David up there. If I could ask a question about if we be still looking at collaborating with Durham, York, or Peterborough for recycling facilities, like to share facilities or partner with them to sort of alleviate the strain on our landfills right now, because they have some. Well, we know that York-Durham has a very large facility, and Peterborough's looking at building one with hopefully us as a partner, one of the partners. But could you elaborate on that, or fill us in on what's happening with that?
Certainly, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, there are a number of different initiatives that we're doing. We continually collaborate with our surrounding municipalities. We'll be getting ideas for source separated organics. That's a program. Then there will be a report going to council in the fourth quarter of this year. We'll be looking at options for that. In terms of long-term waste management options, the engineering group is doing a study right now that we're providing input in regarding long-term options for waste management, and that will include potential collaboration with other municipalities. As well, the entire market is going to be changing in the next few years as we move to extended producer responsibility. So that means that the producers of the recyclable materials will be paying for their processing, and we will continue to look at regionalization there. So anywhere we can provide an effective solution where we're able to save on landfill space and at the same time provide a good cost-effective solution, we'll certainly look at that.
Oh, by the way, Dave Lemke, you can't show up at the end of the meeting and then take credit for being at the meeting, just so you know. So, but we appreciate you, thanks. Any further questions for Public Works? Seeing none, can I get a motion to receive the Public Works 2022 budget overview? Councillor Ashmore and Vale, all in favor? That's passed. Thank you very much, Brian, to you and your staff for everything you do and for showing up today. And I need a confirming bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special... Sure. You've had enough questions. I think you're done.
May I ask a question of the CIO? Thank you. We heard today of at least a couple of staff movements, and I don't know about the rest of council, but I was unaware of them. I'm wondering, the communications group puts out weekly highlights every Friday, and I'm wondering if maybe once a month they could include staff changes that have occurred, because I think it's helpful for council to know who's doing which jobs.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, great suggestion. We'll take that back. I should clarify as well, and I had been talking to the mayor even leading up to today, that the intent today was actually to introduce some of the new staffing. Certainly appreciate that communications, although we can send something out saying so-and-so is new over there, it's better to hear it from us. So I do have a staffing update as well next week on the council agenda to try to catch up sort of over the summer months as well. But certainly appreciate the comment in general over time.
Thank you. Can I get a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special council meeting of council of Tuesday, September 14th, 2021, please? Councillor Vale, moved by Councillor Vale, second by Councillor Richardson. All in favor? And that's passed. And I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Dunn and Yo, all in favor? That's passed. We are adjourned. Thank you to everyone who contributed today.